Welcome to the Nutritional Coaching Institute Men's Hormone Masterclass. My name is Sam Miller and I'll be your instructor. We'll be covering everything from the HPTA to the endocrine system and how male testosterone levels impact health, performance, and longevity. We'll talk about the interrelationship between testosterone and other hormones, such as cortisol, and how the circadian rhythm and sleep play such a huge role in testosterone production. We'll look at commonly overlooked variables, client application scenarios, and the science behind all of this in terms of testosterone. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the course. Men have approximately 1/3 the testosterone levels today that our predecessors did during the 20th century. In fact, we're experiencing such a discrepancy that our male forefathers would likely test in the range of what we'd now classify as superphysiological or even steroidal levels. Depending on the studies cited, medical professionals estimate total testosterone to be just shy of 400 nanograms per deciliter. This is even for men in their 30s. To give you some perspective, 400 is towards the bottom end of the reference range. Complications with this hormone are not isolated to elderly men or only men with pre-existing medical conditions. Testosterone is commonly depicted or described as being macho, or sometimes it's associated with a muscular physique. But there's more to testosterone than meets the eye. Within our body, there exists a delicate balance from our brain all the way down to our reproductive organs that keep this hormone functioning. As a primary androgen and cornerstone of health, it's incredibly important for nutrition coaches to understand the multifaceted role and implications of testosterone, the primary male androgen. In the medical field, bioidentical testosterone has become one of the most widely prescribed medications in the United States. It's actually increased 5-fold according to 2011 data. This increase has resulted in the dramatic growth of testosterone replacement therapy sector in the pharmaceutical industry, from $18 million in the 1980s to $1.6 billion in 2011. This means that more and more men are testing with inferior levels and more men are being placed on testosterone replacement. While some men truly need this replacement, others have not received proper education around how nutrition, training, and lifestyle can impact their testosterone levels. Whether you're a coach, athlete, or simply an active male wanting to learn more about testosterone, chances are you'll come across this issue for yourself or a male peer during your lifetime. Coaches, you're likely going to experience all levels of testosterone amongst your male clients. High, low, and clients who are in the middle. Some clients who have already been prescribed hormone replacement by their doctors. The purpose of this masterclass is not necessarily to treat any pre-existing conditions or diseases, but rather to cultivate an understanding of how to work with those clients on both ends of the spectrum and understand the ramifications of this hormone, as many of the causes for decreased testosterone can be managed through lifestyle factors such as sleep, nutrition, fitness, and supplementation. Understanding how to manage this powerful hormone through controllable and coachable factors can restore quality of life for individuals who have been struggling physically, mentally, and emotionally. Testosterone is intertwined with energy levels, immunity, muscle recovery, libido, fertility, and reproductive health, as well as cardiovascular and metabolic health. Clients will come to you in all stages of their journey, whether in preparation for a major competition or seeking your guidance after having bad coaching experiences elsewhere. Understanding the life implications of low testosterone or male androgen deficiency can empower you to have a more profound impact with your male coaching clients and in many ways provide them with their quality of life back. We must realize that many clients will also be unaware of the potential severity of any issues that they may be having, and they may not connect the link between the symptoms, their biofeedback, and hormone levels. In addition to being an integral part of male health and well-being, testosterone is oftentimes associated with virility or how manly a guy is. It goes without saying that you should always be tactful, respectful, and keep an open mind when you're talking to a client with a potential testosterone issue. No man is going to openly advertise that he may have a problem. Furthermore, this is exacerbated as a result of a myriad of stereotypes and misinformation about people who lack understanding around how much testosterone is actually needed for anabolism and virility. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. Low testosterone can be equally problematic in terms of your joint health, organ issues, immune health, and not just reproductive function. So keep that in mind when working with clients. While testosterone is often associated with sex drive, it does not always mean that all men with lower spectrum of testosterone will experience that issue. In fact, it's just one of many issues commonly cited by patients and doctors. Nonetheless, we can see that this is a systemic issue that impacts the health of men on multiple levels. Having clarity on the multifaceted nature of the male endocrine system is the first step to coaching these men through a potentially wide array of biological issues. Before discussing how to address the male androgen deficiency and coaching applications, we're going to go over basic biochemistry of the endocrine system, the HPTA axis, which I have here on my board, and common symptoms that arise from compromised testosterone levels. Be mindful that as coaches, our scope of practice is to assist in hormonal health with nutrition, training, and supplementation. We're not licensed to treat any disease such as androgen deficiency or hypogonadism. Any interventions or modifications listed are strategies for lifestyle management, and these are not treatment protocols. We will divide our coverage of male hormones into a science and application sections. First, we're going to cover the science of the HPTA, which regulates testosterone hormonal production in the male body. Testosterone, like our other hormones in the body, is governed and regulated by our body's endocrine systems. Specifically, in males, the HPTA is responsible for the delicate balance of continued testosterone production. While terms like endocrine system, hypothalamus, pituitary, and testicular axis may sound quite mechanical, it's actually subject to change and fluctuate at any time as a result of environmental stressors and internal variables. Think of the HPTA as a complex orchestra of instruments. It's not an automated assembly line. For things to go well, there's a delicate balance to the production. As stated previously, the HPTA acronym stands for the relationship between the hypothalamus, which is in our brain, our body's pituitary gland, and then lastly, testicles in males. The HPTA runs on a loop of signals, hormonal precursors, and hormones. Gonadotropin-releasing hormone, or GnRH, is secreted from the hypothalamus by GnRH-expressing neurons. The anterior portion of the pituitary gland then produces luteinizing hormone, LH, and follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH. Then, the testicles produce testosterone, assuming there are requisite raw materials such as cholesterol. Cholesterol starts off in the body as this large molecule, basically 27 units. The first stage in steroid hormone synthesis, or testosterone synthesis, is removal of 6 of those units of cholesterol to form pregnenolone, a hormonal precursor to testosterone. Once we have pregnenolone in the body, we can make an intermediary hormone that allows us to begin creating androgens like testosterone. Without this middle link, we lack the structural foundation for our testosterone on a molecular level. This is why you'll see men on cholesterol-reducing medications like statin drugs have a reduction in testosterone levels. Once testosterone is produced, this testosterone is either free, bound by albumin, SHBG, or converted to estrogen. In a healthy male, if testosterone needs to be replenished, the body simply signals the production of more hormone, assuming the requisite raw materials are available, by producing GnRH and producing LH. Think of these precursors as the trigger that fire the bullet to create testosterone. To be fully potent and for the bullet to be effective, there cannot be a trigger malfunction. Once testosterone is present in the bloodstream, it can either be free, bound, or converted to estrogen through aromatase. What makes the HPTA, our endocrine system, incredibly delicate or fragile is that it's constantly scanning and observing our external environment for stressors, while simultaneously evaluating our internal hormone levels using an internal system of checks and balances. While this scanning of external stressors and threats may sound a little archaic, remember we're hardwired in the same manner as our ancestors. Our biology hasn't evolved that much over time, but our societal demands, training stimulants, and nutrition strategies have. Hundreds or even thousands of years ago, the HPTA had a very basic duty when it came to testosterone. Our bodies needed adequate amounts of food, water, sleep, and sunlight to optimize hormonal function. Why? Because the basis of biology is survival. The human body knows better than to reproduce during times of extreme famine, stress, or scarcity. Any extremes were a signal or indication to adjust or halt hormonal production to conserve energy. Sex and reproduction require energy, which is something we want to conserve during times of scarcity. Logically, a stressful or scarce environment would indicate the chances of successfully breeding and carrying a child to term would be pretty slim, and we wouldn't be able to feed infants. By downregulating testosterone production, the male conserves energy for essential tasks like finding food and surviving. We're operating with technology comparable to a typewriter in an age where we have these Apple MacBooks. Your body does not understand what CrossFit is, what a ketogenic diet is. It simply perceives tension, load, stress, and nourishment. Remember this going forward, as it will be a key component of understanding the various mechanisms by which the body reduces total testosterone output. Be mindful that these adjustments and downregulations are attempts at survival and the body attempting to reduce stress inflicted upon it by conserving energy and hormonal output. When the body does this with testosterone specifically, it's referred to as hypogonadism by doctors. This is a general term which applies regardless of the portion of the HPTA is broken. This term is divided into three main types. When you hear clinicians or doctors reference low testosterone, you'll often hear three terms: primary, secondary, and idiopathic hypogonadism. This terminology is simply used to distinguish between three types of hormonal imbalance, often caused by genetic factors: physical trauma to the head or testicles, and last but not least, chronic stress. Kalman's or Klinefelter's disease are examples of conditions that impact testosterone. Primary hypogonadism is a result of testicular trauma or a genetic condition that results in improper testicular function, translating that LH we discussed earlier into testosterone. Secondary hypogonadism refers to the function of the pituitary gland. This could be a result of a pituitary injury, a head trauma, a prolactinoma, which would be a small tumor, or a host of other top-down issues from the brain and glands as opposed to a testicular issue with testosterone production. All types of hypogonadism require consulting a physician for treatment, but secondary hypogonadism has a potential to be course-corrected and sometimes restored through proper training, nutrition, and lifestyle. As mentioned above, it is not within our scope of practice to deal with genetic complications or handle the physical trauma that alter our clients' biology. We must understand this, that as men with healthy testicles and functioning manhood, we can still have low testosterone because of pituitary issues. This is a commonly misunderstood topic. For the purposes of this class and presentation, we're going to focus on secondary and idiopathic hypogonadism, as it is sometimes reversible through proper recovery, nutrition, and stress management. While stress is a general term, for the purposes of this class, it can generally stem from undereating, overtraining, or truly any type of mental or physical exertion. As nutrition coaches, we cannot mend reproductive organs or undo a traumatic brain injury, but we can provide is a stable environment for the body to restore and produce hormones by reducing the load of stress on the body. Before covering practical application of how to resolve this dietary stress, we will first discuss the impact of stress on the male HPTA. We will cover more on each type of stress in this masterclass, especially in the application section. For now, it's important to understand that the burden placed on the endocrine system primarily occurs through two main mechanisms. Excess physical stress on the body creates an overproduction of cortisol, a stress hormone, and glucocorticoid, or corticosteroid. An increase in this physical stress also inhibits STAR protein, or steroidogenic acute regulatory protein, in our mitochondria. This is a protein responsible for cholesterol transfer and manufacturing of androgens at a very, very basic level. Think of STAR protein as a necessary transporter to create androgens. Mitochondria have this protein on their surface, which actually brings cholesterol into the cell to make hormones like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, and similar hormones. There are countless other enzymes, proteins, and compounds in mitochondria responsible for hormonal synthesis. Additionally, a lack of nutrients and total calories reduces the amount of raw materials available to manufacture pregnenolone, which is later converted to testosterone, as we discussed earlier. Additionally, a third problem could be undue physical stress that can mitigate the signal of LH, resulting in less total production of testosterone as well. Conditions to be aware of that we cannot treat would be a pituitary prolactinoma, Klinefelter's, Kalman's, testicular cancer, or Cushing syndrome. Causes of HPTA dysfunction, as we alluded to in the previous section, there's basically three main types: genetics, physical trauma to the hypothalamus, pituitary, or testicles, and third are varying forms of chronic stress. Now that we have a baseline understanding of how the HPTA operates, we can dissect these three main causes using the same acronym used to describe the endocrine system. Any kinks in the chain, whether it's the H, P, or T, can cause dysfunction and dysregulation to the entire axis. Physical or genetic complications can result in the misfiring of GnRH, or gonadotropin-releasing hormone, from the hypothalamus, reduced LH signaling from the pituitary, or failure to produce testosterone from the testicles. Most often, as coaches, we're going to be focusing on items that are optimizing the pituitary function by reducing stress, making raw materials readily available, and allowing the testicles to do their job. As coaches, that's the greatest area where we can have impact, is on these individuals who have a healthy pituitary and they have solid testicular function. Our goal for them is to optimize testosterone, free up testosterone, preventing SHBG from being too high, and limit the excessive conversion from testosterone to estrogen. The primary consideration as coaches that we need to assess with clients is sleep and recovery. While potentially the most obvious component of hormonal production, sleep is one of the most overlooked elements of a successful program. Achieving slow wave sleep is an integral part of testosterone production. Even partial sleep reduction, lasting 1 week at 5 hours per night, has been shown to decrease overall testosterone production by 15% in healthy young men. Another study revealed that men who slept 4 hours per night had an average of 200 to 400 nanograms per deciliter for testosterone levels, which was lower than men who slept 8 hours per night and had closer to 500 to 700 nanograms per deciliter. In addition, a study of Chinese males, researchers basically calculated that an hour of extra sleep per night led to about 15% increase in testosterone production. This correlation can be seen in clients with sleep apnea or disturbed sleep patterns. Clients with sleep apnea are especially prone to be candidates for testosterone replacement therapy, so being on top of sleep is a #1 priority. Be mindful that sleep also serves as a circadian rhythm reset. Proper melatonin production at night, followed by a rise in morning cortisol, is essential to hormonal balance and well-being. Chronic cortisol elevations or nighttime cortisol elevations disturb the production of melatonin from the pineal gland that rob us of that much-needed sleep and recovery. During sleep, you make the most testosterone and growth hormone. It's totally counterproductive to slow down your body's ability to make these hormones, and that's what blue light does. In addition to slumping your melatonin production, it makes it even harder to sleep. Blue light is defined as light wavelengths that are basically 400 to 495 nanometers. It's the light that's constantly emitted from electronics. It's also the type of light you want to stay away from in the evenings, especially if you're having hormonal imbalances and fatigue. The hypothalamus and pituitary are two major areas in the brain that control your hormonal system. Your hormonal imbalance starts in the brain. That's the main control center. And blue light turns off your control center. Simply put, there's a lot of intricacies to it, but the functional MRIs and PET scans have shown that when our brain is exposed to this type of light, your hypothalamus activity slows down. We know sleep is when our brain is trying to recover and what are hormones controlled by? The hypothalamus. Almost all of them are controlled by the hypothalamus, and at the same time, blue light activates other parts of the brain, increasing alertness, and that's not what we want. Staying asleep is crucial so that you hit all vital stages of sleep, including slow wave sleep. During slow wave sleep is when we have the highest secretion of FSH and LH. These are the two hormones released by the pituitary that tell your testicles to make hormones. In men, this is testosterone. When you deprive yourself of slow wave sleep, you will release less LH, and you'll actually shift the testosterone-cortisol ratio in the favor of cortisol. Less sleep, less testosterone, and more cortisol means chronic inflammation, poorly communicating hormonal systems. We'll discuss supplements for improving sleep and recovery in the coaching and application section. As coaches, the second main area of diminished testosterone that we can focus on is undereating. Calorie deficits, eating disorders, and chronic undereating impact testosterone levels at both angles mentioned in the HPTA overview section. The body downregulates testosterone to conserve energy based on what is perceived as a lack of resources or physical stress. This occurs for two primary reasons. The body needs adequate dietary cholesterol as the base for our body's hormones, and androgens begin in the body as cholesterol before being converted into pregnenolone and then later converted into testosterone. A lack of sufficient nutrients is a surefire way to compromise testosterone production. In addition to the cholesterol base required for pregnenolone, we also need vital minerals like zinc, selenium, boron, vitamin D. To make matters worse, chronic calorie deficits or disordered eating in the form of anorexia place the body under immense stress, resulting in limited raw materials that are available to be converted into pregnenolone. We can also mitigate the cortisol response through proper nutrition and peri-workout supplementation. This was studied in the European Journal of Applied Physiology. Insulin is a hormone secreted by your pancreas after a rise in blood sugar and also works in opposition of cortisol because they're counter-regulatory hormones. For example, exercise induces a reduction in blood glucose, which is counter-regulated by increases in levels of epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol, and growth hormone. The rise in blood concentrations of these counter-regulatory hormones is dependent upon both exercise intensity, duration, and is proportional to the rate of glucose uptake by the contracting skeletal muscle. Simply put, if you're working out intensely, you're likely going to be burning blood glucose and having at least a small spike of cortisol during your workout. By timing this influx of insulin, ideally around your training sessions, we can further tilt the cortisol balance in our favor by opposing it with insulin, which will create a more optimal environment for testosterone production. A simple example would be having essential amino acids and cyclic dextrin during a workout, followed by a whole food meal post-workout. This combination reduces cortisol production, muscle protein breakdown, and assists in returning the body to a parasympathetic state of recovery post-workout. A third main area of attention as nutrition coaches or strength and conditioning specialists will be overtraining. Studies are now investigating the relationship between endorphins and luteinizing hormone. Too much endurance work leads to a subsequent production of endorphins, and that's been associated with a decrease in LHRH, which is the hormone that tells the body to release LH, as we mentioned before. Remember, endorphins are usually cited as the reason for runner's high or the feelings that we experience during these endurance activities. As discussed earlier, because LH is a precursor to testosterone, this is a severe consequence of overtraining. Endurance activities aren't the only culprit for overtraining, however. While resistance training does have the capability to increase testosterone and growth hormone, too much lifting also creates hormonal complications. Excessive volume and lifting creates the problem of elevated cortisol levels paired with excessive muscle protein breakdown relative to muscle protein synthesis. While overtraining can be more of an acute issue that can be remedied, this is where tracking biofeedback, recoverable volume, and periodizing your training with your nutrition becomes essential. By periodizing, we mean matching phases of planned overreaching with increased sleep and increased calorie consumption. When clients enter a calorie deficit or have body composition goals, it's wise to shift from a performance-focused training approach to centering a program on hypertrophy movements, accessory work, and sometimes even bodybuilding. This entails of being mindful that each training type causes a unique cascade of adaptations in the body. Case in point, performance programs are not lifestyle programs, and lifestyle programs are not bodybuilding programs. All too often, we'll have CrossFit boxes or irregular corporate gyms advocating summer shred challenges or failing to consider the steep caloric deficit and the combination with heavy CrossFit work that simply don't go hand in hand. When creating an integrated, mutually periodized program where nutrition and training are happily married, the following items are top of mind to create positive hormonal adaptations. The hormonal adaptations to the training session, the energetic demands of each session, the training adaptations, and the imposition of stress versus the body's ability to adapt to that stress. This is compounded by some substantial safety risks that arise when athletes are placed in a deficit, thereby impairing their ability to recover. Remember, training for performance is often the broadest training objective and requires the development of a broad spectrum of the body's capacities concurrently: strength, power, speed, agility, general endurance, specific endurance, the list goes on. As several different types of training and methods are used, whether it's weightlifting, gymnastics training, GPP, and agility work, a byproduct of this is some long training sessions or multiple sessions per day. This means we must increase calorie intake. Intense training in a calorie deficit can impair the body's ability to manage cortisol while also impacting thyroid output. The battle for fat loss with impaired thyroid level and cortisol output is a recipe for disaster, and it's a recipe for testosterone problems as well. It places a significant strain on reproductive hormone function, and this could be testosterone or testosterone derivatives. While the above examples showcase a mismatch of CrossFit or performance-based training with a calorie deficit, there are countless other improper pairings that we can't fit into a single course. The point of the last illustration was simply an example of popular mainstream mistakes. Remember, when planning training cycles as a coach or nutritional cycles, we must match the appropriate nutritional periodization with the appropriate training methodology to preserve hormones. While we know steering your nutrition and training is necessary for physique and performance changes, not all programs are complementary. Consider the following as a 24 to 36 week training cycle, maybe 8 to 12 weeks of a calorie deficit with a hypertrophy dominant, lower injury risk aesthetic program, followed by 8 to 12 weeks in maintenance or more of a reverse diet phase with a strength and technique focus, largely neurological. Another 8 to 12 weeks could be performance phase with multiple modalities, but we would need to increase nutrient consumption to support that work capacity and an optimized hormonal profile. Our fourth and final consideration after overtraining is lifestyle and total stress load. If the body is exposed to prolonged stress from multiple angles, whether it's from sleep, overtraining, malnourishment, or a combination of all the items, the HPTA and adrenals can begin to enter what's called a resistance phase. From a biochemical perspective, during prolonged stress, you'll start to see substantial drops in hormones like DHEA and testosterone as hormonal precursor material is diverted towards the cortisol production pathway, also known as the pregnenolone steal. The key here is a hormone named pregnenolone, which was discussed earlier. Pregnenolone is the precursor or raw material to both the sex hormones and cortisol. When testosterone resources are diverted and utilized for cortisol, this is named the pregnenolone steal. After some time, the body simply runs out of ways to manufacture stress hormones and cortisol levels finally begin to drop. Now you have low sex hormones and the stress hormones are low. Levels of neurotransmitters like GABA, serotonin, dopamine, and adrenaline are also often low. If a coach suspects that cortisol is the impact on the testosterone or HPTA axis, it might be a wise idea for a 4-point salivary cortisol exam, which could be worthwhile investment for the client in question. A healthy cortisol pattern would have a natural elevation in the morning, followed by a drop or reduction in PM cortisol. Having 4 data points allows coaches to track the cortisol levels across the course of a client's day. Think of your total volume of stress kind of like a bank account. While individual tolerances and savings thresholds may vary, we walk into a week with a set amount of cash flow, or in this case, stress flow, along with a set amount of recovery. To keep your account balanced in terms of stress, you need to carefully monitor the outputs or stressors drawing from the account and the inputs or personal recovery investments that you're making into that account. Maintaining this is a fine balance, and it's what allows some to train more than others over the course of weeks, months, and years. When you compound this over time, you've got a recipe for continued progress. If you find yourself struggling with stress, begin to ask myself or yourself, have I balanced my account? Are my life stressors, training stressors exceeding my capacity to recover and impacting my hormonal profile? If so, we need to implement more tools for recovery like sleep, nutrition, meditation, breathing, soft tissue work, or any other activity that primes the rest and digest response in your body, known as the parasympathetic. Keep a close eye on your progress, such as weight lifted, repetitions performed, workout time, and labs if possible, as well as a general awareness for your current life demands outside of the gym. A final consideration when we're coaching athletes is the use of performance-enhancing drugs. Supraphysiological testosterone levels from anabolic steroids or exogenous hormones and testosterone derivatives, they temporarily inhibit the HPTA axis as discussed earlier. It signals the body that there's sufficient hormone levels present because they have high levels of testosterone already. The body's response is to downregulate the release of LH from the pituitary and subsequently decrease testosterone output from the testicles, assuming there's no measures used to preserve intratesticular testosterone while using the anabolics. While this course isn't designed to instruct coaches on performance-enhancing drug use, a coach does need to be in tune with his or her athletes and understand what signals to look for. In the case of exogenous hormone, use of pharmaceutical intervention or a physician providing some assistance may be required in order to kickstart the HPTA, restore natural function of LH signaling, and testicular function as well. Remember, the HPTA produces androgens. If you feel there are sufficient androgens present already, it will not necessarily see the need to produce additional androgens naturally from the HPTA axis. This is not exclusive to only exogenous testosterone or testosterone injections. Testosterone, testosterone derivatives, DHT derivatives, oral steroids, 19-NOR, prohormones, and SARMs can all have somewhat suppressive effects depending on the dosage utilized by the athlete. For those less familiar with performance-enhancing drugs, this means that we're talking about both injectable, oral, and designer or synthetic steroids that can have equally deleterious effects on the endocrine system. More and more athletes are choosing to utilize compounds with shorter half-lives to circumvent drug testing, but that doesn't mean that these compounds are void of side effects. Many athletes take a more is better mentality when it comes to their dosing, which exacerbates the suppressive effects of these compounds because they're increasing the amount utilized. When assisting a client recovering from PED usage, pay special attention to their LH and FSH levels, in addition to total testosterone levels, as they may attempt to restore their natural testosterone production. So as we've discussed in the science section, the primary basis for male testosterone runs off of the HPTA or endocrine axis. I've created this diagram to help illustrate the different components. Always remember that the alphabet or acronym is telling you exactly what you need to know about the various stages of testosterone production. We have the H, which is hypothalamus, which releases GnRH, signaling the pituitary. P stands for pituitary. Pituitary is the pituitary gland that releases luteinizing hormone that then signals the testicles. This is both LH and FSH. FSH stands for follicle stimulating hormone, which can also impact our Sertoli cells and sperm cells and motility as well. Here, once we have this output of your intratesticular testosterone or your total testosterone here, we can then begin to process testosterone derivatives. This is all a good thing. So once you have this testosterone, we want to maximize and preserve as much of this testosterone as possible to be biologically active and available in the body. What can happen though in situations, whether it's higher body fat, higher stress levels, we can begin to convert this testosterone to estrogen, or also under certain circumstances, you'll have clients where a large amount of their testosterone is showing up as bound. This is revealed when we cover our lab section and application on how we can handle SHBG. But what's important to understand from the HPT axis here is we have total testosterone, and then there's a fork in the road of either continuing down the road of testosterone, or we're ending up at these other hormonal analogs, whether that's a testosterone derivative like DHT, or we have estrogen, which could be E2 estradiol, can be measured with labs, and lastly, that bound testosterone. Our body scans this present environment and external environment and provides feedback. You have a feedback loop here back to the hypothalamus. This is why in the medical industry, they've created drugs like SERMs, which are selective estrogen receptor modulators, that will block the signaling of certain hormones at the pituitary. So for example, if the hypothalamus senses lower estrogen, a healthy response would be then to signal GnRH, to signal LH, to signal testosterone. That is one of the most important things to understand from an endocrinology standpoint, is that the HPTA, those are the three main components and how it intertwined in testosterone production. The other variable we have here with the HPTA is essentially cortisol, because before we get here, even if we have luteinizing hormone acting on the testicles to create testosterone, we might have some of the raw materials diverted to create cortisol or stress hormone if our body perceives that we need to produce that energy as a result of a stressful situation. So there is an additional category. It's still a result of the HPTA, but what's happening is the adrenals might get involved, and you're having pregnenolone and DHEA levels shifting preferentially towards the stress response as opposed to an anabolic response here with testosterone. So this is the most simplified diagram. Remember, your hypothalamus and pituitary are near the skull, while the testicles are more reproductive organs, so in other parts of your body, obviously. And as those loop together and provide each other feedback, our body continues on a day-to-day basis producing testosterone. Now that we've discussed some of the preliminary science, we'll cover the application and what we can do as coaches. As coaches, the greatest area that we can have an impact is with individuals who have healthy pituitary and testicular function. Our goal here is to optimize testosterone, free up testosterone, preventing SHBG from being too high, and limit the excessive conversion from testosterone to estrogen. Our primary tools for this are going to be our nutritional protocol, lifestyle advocacy, the supplement protocol, and monitoring our biofeedback and labs. Believe it or not, the first tool is, wait for it, nutrition. The proper macro and micronutrient ratios for person's goals, along with strategically planned and periodized diet, and including diet breaks, can go a long way in preserving hormonal function. Paying attention to food quality and cycling periods of caloric deficits are the best way to keep a healthy client healthy and optimize hormonal function. For clients with a history of disordered eating, or who have habitually followed yo-yo diets or long calorie deficits or extreme dietary protocols, the safest option is typically to reverse diet and bring this client to establish a new maintenance and draw labs and blood work at this new set point. With new clients, calculate their current intake by having them complete a 5 to 7 day food log and evaluate their current nutrient and calorie status. Male clients who are carrying body fat levels in excess of probably 20% or so likely need to reduce their body fat before seeing their ideal hormonal profile, because these fat deposits predispose them to an increase in the aromatase enzyme that converts testosterone to estrogen. In terms of specific nutrients and dietary approaches, the importance of cholesterol and healthy fats cannot be understated. From a non-science perspective, think of this testosterone production process sort of like a pyramid where each level is dependent on the prior level's foundation. Testosterone comes from pregnenolone, and pregnenolone is manufactured from cholesterol. On a molecular level, cholesterol is a precursor to many of the 5 major classes of steroid hormones, because without it, we can't manufacture pregnenolone, also known as the mother hormone. As we discussed earlier in the science section, cholesterol starts as this large molecule with essentially 27 units, and the first stage of steroid hormone synthesis is the removal of 6 of those units of the cholesterol molecule, forming pregnenolone, which is a precursor to testosterone. Once we have this raw material pregnenolone, the body can make an intermediary hormone that allows us to begin creating androgens like testosterone. Remember, this middle link and structural foundation is important as you're setting macros. Remember body size, activity level, the history and hormonal panel of the male, and making your determinations with healthy fats. Individual amounts are going to vary, but there's further evidence by researchers who essentially compared the dietary records and blood tests of 12 men with at least a year of weight training under their belt. The researchers found significant correlations between testosterone levels and total saturated fat intake. So be mindful of getting a balanced ratio of monounsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, and saturated fats. We can obtain healthy fats and cholesterol precursors in the diet through things like whole eggs, preferably free-range, grass-fed butter, healthy oils, lean red meats, and grass-fed beef and bison if you can get it. The second tool for the nutrition coach is advocating a healthy lifestyle. It is hard to believe that just 30 minutes of extra sleep each night can result in an additional 8 days of sleep per year for your clients, maximizing that slow wave sleep as well. You need to guide clients in their journey to be efficient with their schedules and have the proper preparatory routine for bed. Limiting blue light and electronics, along with having other restful and restorative activities, can help prime the body for more efficient sleep and optimize melatonin production to help you make more testosterone and growth hormone. Set the example for your clients with your pursuit and advocacy for sleep. Clients often need time management assistance and advice on how to implement training and their proper recovery techniques into their hectic schedule. Make sure you're not pushing your clients to wake up at 3 a.m. for a 4 a.m. session if they're going to bed at 11 p.m. This does more harm than good to the hormonal profile and needs to be kept top of mind. The third tool for hormonal restoration is supplementation. Most often, as a nutrition coach, it's easiest to free up the testosterone that they already have and limit the conversion of testosterone into excess estrogen. We can reduce SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, and bring estrogen levels into a healthy range, which makes men feel as though they actually have improved or more testosterone, which is true because more will be free and available for them to use in their day-to-day lives. While this will not necessarily be as strong as exogenous testosterone or hormone replacement therapy, they preserve the natural function of the HPTA, which is crucial for clients focusing on fertility or natural hormone optimization. The efficacy of these herbals and supplements will vary from person to person, though most are widely effective with a low chance of any side effects or reactions. Make sure your clients cross-reference these supplements with any prescriptions provided by their physician. In terms of specific supplementation, we're going to talk about a few different herbals and products that we can pay attention to and implement into a client's routine. Some ingredients we can use for natural supplementation include ashwagandha, longjack, or Eurycoma longfolia, fenugreek, testofen extract, SA3, which is spilanthanol flower, DIM for estrogen management, vitamin D is crucial, zinc, a chelated mineral, or zinc aspartate can be very helpful as well. Theanine for reducing cortisol levels, phosphatidylserine for reducing cortisol levels, and rhodiola for helping with that natural circadian rhythm and morning cortisol levels as well. Some of the tools we can use for evaluation, signs, symptoms, and signals of testosterone issues can be seen from the client onboarding process throughout the client journey. It's important to have systems in place to be able to notice the problems from the outset so that you can be as helpful as possible for your clients. Your 3 primary resources will be the new client intake form, a weekly or biweekly biofeedback log, sometimes daily if needed, and client labs. For the intake form, I recommend including sections on any history of past dieting, life stress, sleep quality, or even including an Epworth sleepiness scale. Monitor sleep duration, life enjoyment, training frequency, and a comprehensive food log. If possible, request labs from prior doctor's visits if your client has them. Once completing the intake form, the next step throughout your weekly or biweekly check-ins would be the biofeedback log. The biofeedback log is a weekly journal or daily tool that can be used to assess clients' feelings of well-being, their hormonal status, and physiological progress. The biofeedback log should have similar assessments and markers to your intake form, but be tracked in a streamlined fashion by clients to make the process easy. My favorite biofeedback indicators, I have about 5, they're specific to testosterone, are energy, sleep, appetite, mental clarity or cognition, and libido. While there's not necessarily a direct correlation between immunity and testosterone health, observing a client who gets sick more often is generally a sufficient indicator to get some additional lab work done, assuming they're eating nutrient-dense food and sleeping adequately. The best way that I've found to assess these various biofeedback variables is to utilize a Likert scale, which is a market research term used to essentially track client ratings on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 so that you have a quantitative measure. You can gauge their progression or regression of their symptoms. Additionally, having room for extra comments on the check-in and built into that form allows them to elaborate on their biofeedback after you receive their numerical answer. Oftentimes, clients don't remember their symptoms from several check-ins prior, so having a history of quantitative data points like the Likert scale is vital. Once you've accumulated data points, you can assess the trajectory of the client's energy, their sleep, cognition, and libido, and determine if there's an increase or you need to reduce training sessions or make dietary modifications to support the healthy endocrine system and HPTA axis. If clients are answering and reporting lower on the Likert scale, it means we need to reduce stressors while also making sure they are likely making hormonal improvements so that they score higher on that. Our next tool would be client labs. Another tool at your disposal during the ongoing coaching progress is examining client labs if they have them or are able to get them. The difficult aspect of labs is more so the labs themselves than the client. Let me explain. When these reference ranges are developed, they're designed to include 95% of the population. So that means that researchers take a group, usually a minimum of 120 people, and test them to find the normal range. Anything that falls out of this central 95%, so about 5% or so, is considered abnormal, unhealthy, and then flagged. But does falling within the 95% actually mean we're healthy or disease-free, especially when the majority of our country is obese? Do you want to be just like 95% of the population? Let's take a look at male testosterone levels specifically. The range for total testosterone ranges from about 300 to 1100 nanograms per deciliter depending on the lab, and free T can range anywhere from 5 nanograms per deciliter to 21 nanogram per deciliter. Oftentimes they will sort it depending on age, which is another concept that we can disagree on and pursue another day. But if you land at a total T of 350 with free testosterone of 6, you're still considered normal, but you're in the lowest percentile or lowest section of that reference range. It's safe to say that it's fairly atypical to have a client come in on day one with all this recent lab work, proper labs charted and measured, and hormones gauged. Most clients will come in with this type of data. They'll be coming to you if they've already worked with a doctor from a clinic or an environment or maybe a naturopath that was looking to optimize their total well-being, and now your job is to optimize their nutrition. But the majority of clients, they will come to you and they need you as a liaison between complex scientific concepts, the body's biochemistry, and their doctor. Most doctors work largely in a reactive healthcare environment. A lot of the patients they see on a daily basis are unhealthy or sick with some form of chronic disease. It's uncommon for them to have a patient who's interested in optimizing their hormonal profile, as ridiculous as that may sound. A standard lab panel is likely only going to include things like blood cell counts, cholesterol, or fasted blood glucose measures. Arm your clients with the tools and knowledge they need for a successful appointment by preparing them with a list of tests that they should request ahead of time. Clients with insurance can generally get this covered during their annual physical. Alternatives for clients without insurance include private medical labs or at-home lab testing. The primary lab markers for male clients interested in testosterone-specific variables include total testosterone, which is the measure of total circulating testosterone, free testosterone, which is the measure of testosterone unbound by albumin or sex hormone-binding globulin, SHBG. DHEA sulfate can be tested, which is a raw hormonal material and also can help you to see what's going on with the adrenals and overall cortisol production as well. LH, FSH are other measures that need to be tested. LH is what the pituitary releases to stimulate your Leydig cells in your testicles to make testosterone. Prolactin is another important variable. Prolactin inhibits FSH and LH, so it can also cause low testosterone. This is why pituitary prolactinomas can cause low testosterone, because there's extra prolactin release. Prolactin is kind of a secondary stress hormone, so we can keep an eye on it with the labs and see what it is doing to FSH and LH. It is not often used by doctors. SHBG, as we mentioned, is important to test because it impacts free testosterone. So SHBG is sex hormone binding globulin. Estradiol is the amount of testosterone that's converted to estrogen, or E2, through aromatase. It's one of many types of estrogen, but it's one of the prominent ones. You can get a sensitive estradiol test. We can also test in males hydroxy vitamin D, and if we suspect that DHEA sulfate is an issue and there's low testosterone, we can always pursue a salivary cortisol exam to evaluate their circadian rhythm and check our cortisol response naturally. So for example, if you had that client that we talked about earlier with a total testosterone of 350 and a free T of 6, they're still considered normal, but you're actually in the lowest percentile of normal, which means you don't get a call from your doctor, and it means that your client or you are told that you're fine. Worry less about the set reference range and pay more attention to your client's deviations relative to their medical history or their time with you. Chart those over time. Additionally, we have some notes for coaches who have clients that are already on testosterone replacement therapy, or their doctor has placed them on testosterone replacement therapy. While the focal point of this course is the HPTA and natural androgen production, you will encounter clients that have been placed on TRT as a result of their genetics, physical trauma, chronic stress, or perhaps even past exogenous hormone use. With a large subset of the population taking these measures, it's important as a coach to distinguish between hormone replacement and performance-enhancing drug use. Many of these clients are placed on TRT by their doctor to maintain their quality of life, brain function, libido, and not just done as a measure of performance or to be more muscular or more powerful in the gym. Oftentimes, the clients you'll find on TRT are clients that were unaware that they had a choice to restore their hormones naturally. Their doctor may have elected to have them on TRT without them full well knowing that this would be a potentially permanent decision for their life. For clients with truly low testosterone levels, TRT can be a miraculous solution not only for quality of life, but also for reducing risk of cardiovascular complications at the proper dose. Low testosterone can be equally as dangerous as overly high testosterone, both for heart health, metabolic health, and joint health as well. While the media would have you thinking otherwise, insufficient testosterone means a lack of testosterone to aromatize and convert into estrogen. Low estrogen has many systemic effects as well in the male body. We need small amounts of estrogen, even for things like fat burning, and balance testosterone and estrogen for libido and male sexual function. We even actually have estrogen that will line your body near your reproductive organs that's responsible for libido, erections, and male sexual function and ejaculation. The primary goal of coaching a TRT coaching client should be to keep them stable and support their health with proper nutrition and training. The same lab work should be conducted to monitor the client's hormonal profile while being treated by their doctor. A special consideration for those on long-term testosterone replacement, or HRT, is to monitor hematocrit levels and donate blood periodically throughout the year as needed. This might be annually, quarterly, biannually. It should not really be more than that, but donating the blood will help with hematocrit. Hematocrit is a measure of blood thickness, which is often because testosterone replacement can increase red blood cell production. This is natural. It happens with testosterone levels being increased. The best natural remedy is simply to donate blood to the Red Cross and help save life in the process of improving your own biochemistry and reducing your hematocrit levels. A final note for TRT clients is that the supplement ashwagandha seems promising in terms of improving sperm quality and cortisol levels, even when on exogenous hormone replacement therapies. Understanding both the science and application of testosterone, we can help to improve men's health and hormone awareness. The emphasis of the next two sections is on adaptive physiology, which is a concept that suggests that our bodies develop chronic illness to adjust to our environment, and that the chronic illness or hormonal variances serve as a protective role, either to keep our body out of danger, to heal, or to prevent us from reproducing in the context of a harsh external environment. This can be seen in the case of thyroid health, inflammation, and external threats such as infections. The thyroid gland is the main metabolism gland in your body, and it's an integral part of the endocrine system. If your thyroid's not working correctly, you'll not only have a difficult time shifting body composition or achieving weight loss, but you may also see a cascade of additional hormonal issues not exclusive to the thyroid, such as with testosterone. The thyroid gland is located in the throat at the base of the neck. If we were to perform a cross-section of the throat, inside we'd find the butterfly-shaped gland underneath the larynx, which is the thyroid. As discussed earlier, is a section in your brain called the hypothalamus, as you can see here on the board. The very same section that releases gonadotropin-releasing hormones also releases thyrotropin-releasing hormone, or TRH. It tells the pituitary gland to produce thyroid-stimulating hormones, which then tells the thyroid how much hormone T4, T3 to produce. The thyroid gland itself puts out a number of thyroid hormones, most of them being thyroxine, otherwise known as T4. Over 90% of thyroid hormone produced by the thyroid gland is T4, which is considered to be a prohormone because it has minimal metabolic effects in the body. T3 is the active thyroid hormone, but only 7% is produced by the thyroid gland. The rest has to be converted in the body from T4. When operating properly, the thyroid gland produces thyroid hormones T3 and T4, which regulate many processes in our bodies, primarily hormonal balance, protein synthesis, and also metabolic rate. Low testosterone could be a consequence or even an exacerbating factor of thyroid disease. Making reproductive hormones is not a priority for the body when it is under stress. Chronic stress, whether it's physical, emotional, or dietary stress, puts the body in a state where it's thinking about survival and not about reproduction, potentially using its metabolic thermostat or the thyroid to adjust other hormones as well, maintaining that balance in the body. Thyroid hormone deficiency affects all tissues in the body, but especially testosterone, including multiple endocrine changes that alter growth hormone, corticotropin, glucocorticosteroids, gonadal function, and primary hypothyroidism is associated with low testosterone. Men with primary hypothyroidism have subnormal responses to LH, the luteinizing hormone that comes from the pituitary gland, and GnRH from the hypothalamus. Free testosterone concentrations are reduced in men with primary hypothyroidism, and thyroid hormone replacement has actually been shown to normalize free testosterone concentration in those cases. Sometimes you'll see prolactin elevations, and even prolactin will decline with that thyroid hormone replacement therapy or normalization of the thyroid hormone levels. Thyroid hormone has also been shown to affect SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin concentrations. Men with hyperthyroidism have elevated concentrations of SHBG, and thyroid hormone therapy or normalizing the thyroid can bring that back in range. In contrast to patients with hypothyroidism, men with hyperthyroidism exhibit a hyper-response to LH or GnRH administration and subnormal responses to HCG, which can be viewed as a luteinizing hormone analog. When operating properly, the thyroid gland produces the thyroid hormones T3 and T4, which regulate many processes in our bodies, primarily hormonal balance, protein synthesis, and metabolic rate as well. Low testosterone could actually be a consequence or exacerbating factor of thyroid disease. Making reproductive hormones is simply not a priority for the body when it is under stress. Chronic stress, whether it's physical, emotional, or dietary stress, puts the body in a state where it's thinking about survival and not about reproduction, and potentially using this metabolic thermostat of the thyroid to adjust or downregulate other hormones as well. Thyroid hormone deficiency affects all tissues of the body, but especially testosterone, including multiple endocrine changes that alter growth hormone, corticosteroids, glucocorticoids, and gonadal function. Primary hypothyroidism is associated with low testosterone. Men with primary hypothyroidism have subnormal responses to luteinizing hormone that signal from the pituitary to produce testosterone, as well as GnRH, which is coming from the hypothalamus to signal the pituitary. Free testosterone concentrations are reduced in men with hypothyroid, and sometimes thyroid hormone replacement can normalize these free testosterone concentrations. While prolactin is not consistently elevated, prolactin does decline following thyroid hormone replacement or restoration and balance of the thyroid. Thyroid hormone is also known to impact SHBG, or sex hormone binding globulin. Men with hyperthyroidism typically have elevated concentrations of testosterone and SHBG. Thyroid hormone therapy in normal men can duplicate this elevation. In addition, estradiol elevations are observed in men with hyperthyroidism, and gynecomastia is common in them as well. In contrast to patients with hypothyroidism, men with hyperthyroid exhibit hyperresponse to LH or GnRH, in contrast to what we discussed earlier about the suboptimal response to LH. When we're under stress, the HPA axis steps on the gas to initiate a stress response. All the messenger hormones of the HPA axis increase in an effort to raise cortisol and inhibit hormones. Cortisol can inhibit the release of TSH, reducing T4 production. Elevated cortisol also interferes with the conversion of T4 to T3, lowering overall T3 levels. Cortisol will also drive up the production of reverse T3 and reduce the cell receptor sensitivity of thyroid hormone. The combination of this decreased T4 and T3, along with an increase in reverse T3, puts the brakes on metabolic function. So why does this happen? The answer lies in our adaptive physiology. This concept suggests that our bodies develop chronic illness to adjust to our environment, and that really serves as a protective role for our bodies. We've evolved and we were brilliantly designed to achieve a couple main goals: to help us survive and to help us reproduce and basically spread the development of our species. Our bodies are adapting to our environment, and that will ensure the best for us long term as well as the future of our race, essentially. Here's the message our body is hearing. You're not safe here. This isn't a good time to reproduce. I'm going to help you get through this tough winter by slowing down your metabolism. This will allow you to hold more weight, to keep you fed when food is scarce. I'm also going to make you cold and tired so you don't venture out of your cave, because that will keep you safe. Same can be said for the downregulation of reproductive hormones. I'll give you a hypothetical example of how our bodies evolved and were educated to understand the signals that we were sending to them in order to ensure our survival. Modern versions of these signals can also put us in the same adaptive physiology or conservation mode. Back when we were cavemen, one of our main sources of stress was simply lack of food. When we didn't eat or ate things that we were not adapted to digest or had deficiencies in nutrients, this was simply a message to the body that we needed to conserve our resources and reduce calorie burning. In modern days, we can send the same signal to our body by being on a calorie-restricted diet when food is scarce, or eating a highly processed diet of frankenfoods and leading to nutrition deficiencies, or eating things that are considered food today but would not be recognized as food by our predecessors in our current body, like lots of mixed foods, fast foods, cafeteria foods. In the end, as you can see, the thyroid is a very important gland, but also a very sensitive gland that impacts other hormones in the body, like testosterone, leading to androgen deficiency. To provide perspective, every cell in the body has receptors for thyroid hormone, including the Leydig cells, vital cells for testosterone production. Low thyroid hormone leads to elevated cholesterol, triglycerides, and gallstones. Low thyroid hormone can also lead to poor digestive function, including low digestive enzymes and constipation. Constipation can impact the body's ability to clear estrogen, which would impact the hormonal profile of a male client. There are intimate connections between thyroid and other hormones such as testosterone because of the effects we mentioned on luteinizing hormone and gonadotropin-releasing hormone that we discussed earlier. Low thyroid hormone further impacts neurotransmitters, causing low dopamine levels, leading to loss of motivation and willpower, which can have a domino effect of a physical reaction that arguably could impact physical activity, training, quality of life, and testosterone levels. Some of the most commonly seen thyroid defects or dysfunction are autoimmunity in the form of Hashimoto's thyroiditis, Graves' disease are some of the most common forms of hypothyroid or hyperthyroidism, respectively. Chronic stress and elevated cortisol can also interfere with the hormonal signaling necessary for proper thyroid function. Elevated body burdens, such as excess toxins or impaired detoxification, can put extreme stress on the body as well. Since the liver plays a vital role in the conversion of thyroid hormones, a sluggish liver can be the root cause of a thyroid disorder. An example of this would be metabolic endotoxemia. With gut dysfunction, healthy gut flora is also necessary for proper conversion of hormones. Parasites, pathogenic bacteria, yeast, fungus overgrowths, increased gut permeability, and inflammation can all lead to lower levels of thyroid hormone, once again impacting our LH levels in the body and impacting male androgens. When suspecting the thyroid hormone in male clients, we can monitor this through biofeedback and assessing body temperature. Thyroid function can be assessed by tracking basal body temperature in the mornings. When basal body temperature is consistently below 97.8 degrees Fahrenheit, that can indicate hypofunction of the thyroid. Other factors that might raise body temperature that should be ruled out include infections, certain medications, autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, and lupus, or cancer. To assist male clients with their hypothyroid, things that may be impacting their testosterone levels or vice versa, it's important to focus on following specific dietary and lifestyle approaches. We must maximize nutrient density, reduce their toxic exposures in their environment, stabilize their blood sugar, improving blood glucose, reducing inflammation, remove any dietary triggers that may be promoting a leaky gut or permeability, and eliminate foods to which clients are sensitive, potentially even following an autoimmune paleo or elimination diet. Customize diets according to the client's unique needs and what you're seeing in the biofeedback and lab results. Always support the thyroid function by implementing appropriate strategies to improve diet, sleep, exercise routines, and reducing overall life stress. The point is to remove the variables in these areas that might be obstacles to thyroid function and replace them with strategies that support thyroid function, overall well-being, and hormonal health, including the male androgens. Glandular and non-glandular nutritional support and supplementation may be beneficial for several presentations of severe hypothyroidism. That's saying specific underlying causes like gut dysfunction, liver dysfunction, elevated estrogen levels, elevated testosterone should all be addressed along with assessing the thyroid. Since the majority of thyroid disorders are caused by Hashimoto's thyroiditis and Graves' disease, the first therapeutic intervention or course of action as a nutrition coach should often focus on modulating and balancing the immune function and immune system. Common blood chemistry patterns we'll see with primary hypothyroidism is increased TSH, lowered T4, and lowered T3. With secondary hypothyroidism, we're going to see decreased TSH, decreased total T4 and T3, and then with tertiary hypothyroidism, which often occurs in the hypothalamus, we're seeing decreased TSH, decreased total T4, T3, and decreased free T3 as well. When hypothyroidism occurs with adrenal fatigue, we may see increased TSH and even negative thyroid antibodies, which oftentimes happens with Hashimoto's or the higher levels of antibodies. Another form of stressors on the body comes in the form of inflammation, infection, gut permeability, and endotoxemia. All of these have the potential to result in suboptimal androgen levels if the issues are not managed. This is what we'll be covering in our next section. Our next section will be discussing infection or inflammation and other external causes for chronic stress on the body. Chronic stress puts the body in a state where it's not thinking about survival. Once again, this has been a theme of our masterclass. We are basically shifting the focus on hormones away from reproduction. Once again, making reproductive hormones is simply not a priority when the body's under stress. Inflammation or hidden infections become a significant source of stress, primarily on the brain and the hypothalamus, due to our body's attempted response to reconcile itself through the adaptive physiology that we discussed earlier. Inflammation can cause an increase in estrogen production as well as cortisol production. In most cases, there are three main sources of inflammation: food, pathogens, and toxins. If you see that all of the hormones are elevated in the body, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, it suggests that inflammation may be driving these deviation in hormone levels. With gut issues specifically, and in the case of metabolic endotoxemia, you have a constant seeping of lipopolysaccharides or LPS into the bloodstream. When your body sees LPS on the loose, it triggers the immune system, such as cytokines and inflammatory compounds that essentially mobilize the immune system or army. The body's trying to do something smart for itself and essentially fight this perceived villain that it is sensing in the body. Significant changes in the diet and conditions here can substantially improve your overall gut health. Probiotics would only be like bailing out the Titanic with a Dixie cup. It's simply not sufficient. It has to go diet and supplementation together. A poor diet, which includes caffeine, refined sugar, alcohol, conventional meat and dairy products, non-organic fruits and vegetables, can impact inflammation and estrogen levels. Excess caffeine, including coffee, has also been shown in studies to increase estrogen levels as well. Refined sugar depletes the body of the mineral magnesium, important for adrenal function and hormonal production, can create inflammation, stress the adrenal glands, and also upregulate aromatase. Aromatase, remember, is that conversion of testosterone into estrogen. This occurs because of the increase in insulin. While inflammation downregulates certain processes in the body, such as sulfation, it actually upregulates aromatase, as we discussed earlier. This converts androgens like DHEA to estrogens. So inflammation promotes estrogen production from androgens. This can be incredibly problematic for men, and inflammation also impacts how cortisol is metabolized. With aromatase upregulation, androgens, such as androstenedione and testosterone, are converted in excessive amounts of estrogen. The enzyme aromatase can be upregulated due to inflammation, insulin resistance, increased cortisol, xenoestrogen, and mold toxicity. If the liver isn't able to clear all of this extra estrogen, or if the thyroid and gut issues are contributing to something like constipation or digestive issues, these levels may escalate because of the inability to clear estrogen. If someone is supplementing with DHEA or testosterone and aromatase is upregulated, a lot of those hormones will actually be turned into estrogen, like in the case of an HRT case where you'd have testosterone converted to estrogen. So how can we discern the body's hormonal response to inflammation? In lab testing, we see a strong preference for cortisol over cortisone. Usually this means that the body is trying to help give the person energy or fight systemic inflammation. It's a good bet that the individual is highly inflamed, would benefit from an anti-inflammatory diet, and further investigation to see what might be driving this inflammatory response. Typically could be food, pathogens, or even toxins. We could potentially look at other inflammatory markers like CRP or CRP to albumin ratio as well. A strong preference for cortisone in the body, that inactive hormone, over cortisol, the active, usually means that the body is trying to get the person to slow down, stop, rest, and recover. The body will often deactivate excess cortisol into cortisone to protect itself from the negative effects of high cortisol. Oftentimes, this is a good indicator that a higher level of emotional stress is present, and the client would benefit from stress management techniques that help them to deal with stress and that internal psychology and battle of emotions. What we often see with this inflammation or obesity is 11B-HSD1 activity, which is upregulated in the adipose tissue. We see this in hypothyroidism, insulin resistance, or in cases of extreme excess sodium as well. Some side effects of chronic inflammation include chronic fatigue from non-restful sleep as a consequence of low melatonin in the body. Chronic pain, so endorphin production is often suppressed. We also have muscle aches, joint pains, and things like that as well. Gastrointestinal problems are common, such as malabsorption in the gut, which prevent the gut from repairing and cause leaky gut and IBS. Prolonged illness, so white blood cells lose regulation of the cytokine and inflammatory response, so that recovery from illnesses can be prolonged as well, including infections. That recovery from infections may be slowed as well. HPA axis dysfunction, in the case where the pituitary may produce elevated levels of adrenal hormones like cortisol, and cortisol in the early stages of illness may be elevated and then drop to excessively low levels later. It's not uncommon to have a swollen or puffy look along with those aching muscles we mentioned earlier. Reduced androgens, reduced MSH can cause the pituitary to lower its signaling for the production of androgen hormones such as testosterone. We'll also see increased estrogen, as oftentimes gut issues, MSH can upregulate aromatase activity, causing high estrogen and lower testosterone, and following those androgens and estrogens to fall out of balance. We can mitigate inflammation by maximizing nutrient density, once again, reducing toxic exposure, stabilizing those blood glucose levels in clients, trying to reduce inflammation through diet and supplementation, and then eliminate any dietary triggers that promote leaky gut. We're also going to eliminate any foods to which a client is sensitive and customize that diet according to their needs. It's often helpful to remember in gut protocols, we have the 4 R's of removing, repairing, restoring, and reintroducing. Obviously, this class is more focused on androgens and male testosterone and the health of your hormonal profile, but managing gut health can certainly go a long way to improve something like testosterone if, in the case of a client, we have elevated estrogen levels, blood glucose dysregulation, or other problematic issues. So aside from these dietary and lifestyle interventions, we can also use things like glutamine and curcumin to really help inflammation in the gut. Pay attention to irritants like dairy, gluten, and even some non-gluten grains that have carryover effects or crossover effects, corn, refined sugar, alcohol, processed foods, eggs, tomatoes, other nightshades, and adjuvants, which can irritate the gut lining, and individual food sensitivities. So just because something is an irritant to one person does not mean that it's irritant to another. Several of the above topics delve into various forms of implied physical stressors or drains in the body. When evaluating a client, it can be helpful to review their health status as something as simple as a T-chart for evaluating drains in the form of physical stressors or sympathetic nervous system activity with inputs and charges, which could be considered restorative or parasympathetic inputs and activity. Aside from some of the aforementioned physical stressors that we talked about and chronic stress demands on the body, there's another topic to understand as a coach or practitioner, which is the decline of androgen levels with age. This is often referred to as andropause or late onset hypogonadism or late onset low testosterone levels. Andropause or late onset hypogonadism is a common disorder which increases in prevalence with advancing age, so in older men. Diagnosis of late onset, or LOH, is based on the presence of symptoms suggestive of testosterone deficiency. Prominent among them are sexual symptoms like loss of libido, loss of morning erection, and erectile dysfunction, as well as a demonstration of low testosterone levels in the lab work. Andros in Greek means the human male, and pause in Greek literally means a cessation. So literally, the word is translated into andropause. This is where this terminology comes from. It's defined as a symptom associated with a decrease in sexual function or decline in feeling of general well-being, as well as low testosterone levels in an older man. In contrast to menopause, which is universal in female health, well-characterized time process associated with absolute gonadal failure, andropause is really more characterized just by the onset or slow progression of these declining testosterone levels and sexual dysfunction. Many names were given to this, like male menopause, androgen decline in the aging male known as ADAM or aging male syndrome, or once again, late onset hypogonadism. True andropause exists only in those men who have lost testicular function due to diseases or accidents, or in those cases of advanced prostate cancer, testicular cancer subject to surgical or medical castration. Testosterone levels in men typically decline at the rate of 1% per year. This decline is typically more pronounced in the free testosterone levels because of alterations in sex hormone binding globulin, or SHBG. The rate of decline in testosterone levels varies widely in different individuals and is affected by chronic disease such as obesity, different illnesses, serious emotional stress, and medications, and this decline can also be decelerated by management of health and lifestyle factors. Amongst obesity parameters, waist circumference is one of the potentially modifiable risk factors for low testosterone and symptomatic androgen deficiency. Late onset hypogonadism, a clinical and biochemical syndrome, is a common disorder associated specifically with advancing age. That's the thing to focus on here, and deficiency in serum testosterone levels below the young, healthy adult male reference range in labs. It's usually underdiagnosed and often untreated though. Furthermore, it's been estimated that only about 5 to 35% of males with these issues actually receive treatment for their condition. So there's a large percentage that have never spoken to a doctor about it. At present, diagnosis of late onset hypogonadism requires the presence of symptoms and signs of suggestive testosterone deficiency. Once again, remember the late onset hypogonadism number one signal is low libido, so checking that biofeedback is key with older clients. Other manifestations include erectile dysfunction, decreased muscle mass and strength, increased body fat levels if you're testing for that, decreased bone mineral density and osteoporosis, decreased vitality, and sometimes even a depressive or anxious mood. None of these symptoms are specific to the low androgen state, but may rise or create cause for concern around a testosterone deficiency. One or more of these symptoms is needed and has to corroborate with a low serum testosterone level. So it's that biofeedback with the labs. Given the association between androgen deficiency and hazards of things like osteoporosis, cognitive issues, metabolic dysfunction, and the lack of quality of life with sexual life, treatment with testosterone becomes not only intuitive, but really promising. Support clients in seeking out medical advice or refer them to an endocrinologist or naturopathic practitioner would probably be your best bet in this case. We can use things like nutrition and adaptogens, ashwagandha, rhodiola, along with things like saw palmetto or products such as Prostate Supreme to support the aging male. Thus far, initial short-term controlled studies of testosterone therapy in small amounts of healthy older men show beneficial effects on body composition, LDL cholesterol, cardiovascular incidence and risk, as well as cardiac ischemia and possible loss of muscle strength, loss of libido, or general well-being. All of these are positive things. In these studies, there have been no significant adverse effects. Given these findings, it's totally reasonable to consider testosterone replacement in older men with the proper biofeedback and symptoms, that the TRT could be used to raise their bioavailable testosterone levels and free testosterone, and the benefits of the therapy would outweigh the potential risks. As always, even if under the concurrent treatment and supervision from a doctor, it's important to evaluate and manage other factors like inadequate nutrition, confounding illness, infection, inactivity, poor conditioning, excessive alcohol intake, and smoking. Oftentimes, managing these factors will provide a boost in health prior to treatment of TRT or work synergistically with the medical treatment to improve the quality of life while on testosterone replacement. While this type of case may not be your target client demographic, cultivating an understanding can really assist you with clients who are health focused throughout their lifespan, specifically in the aging male. A final consideration for clients under your supervision is medications or external compounds that decrease testosterone production. As a nutrition coach or health professional, you cannot change these prescriptions since you are not a physician, but you should be aware of the impact of these compounds on your client's labs, health, and performance. Certain medications will lower testosterone levels, including but not limited to any corticosteroids like prednisone, opiate-based painkillers, statin drugs, which are cholesterol-lowering medications, spironolactone for high blood pressure, some beta blockers for high blood pressure, SSRIs for depression and anxiety, finasteride or Propecia, which is a hair loss treatment, Tagamet for ulcers and acid reflux, and Nizoral for fungal infections. All of these medications can specifically lower testosterone and are oftentimes seen in the aging male, specifically when we're looking at things like blood pressure, cholesterol, and other cardiovascular incidents. So make sure that you're paying attention to these medications along with those signs and symptoms of andropause when working with older male clients. Oftentimes, one of the most overwhelming elements of being a coach is knowing what labs to look for and how to assess a client if you do actually have functional blood chemistry information or lab work from a doctor. Sometimes this is you just having the proper list of what to look for, like we've talked about in the science and application section of testosterone, but other times this can be discerning what each of these lab values means. For the purposes of today, we're going to focus more on the qualitative or holistic understanding of what each measure or marker is measuring, as opposed to focusing specifically on a certain number of testosterone, since this will likely vary from individual to individual. So some of the biggest things we're going to hit right off the bat. We'll see testosterone. So this is usually the total testosterone. Some labs will do bioavailable testosterone in the body. Usually you'll see total testosterone measured in nanograms per deciliter. So testosterone is usually that total amount that we're pulling from. We also have free testosterone, which is what's left as far as unbound and available in the body. So this is similar to how with thyroid hormone, thyroid binding globulin will essentially reduce the amount of total free thyroid hormones, or if we have a lot of reverse T3 going on, it's going to impact the amount of free T3 in the body and circulating. So with testosterone, we're looking at total testosterone, but also free testosterone to get an idea of what's unbound and really actively usable in the body. Also note that free testosterone is going to be substantially lower than total testosterone. In some cases, free testosterone may be around 2% of that total available amount that we're essentially pulling from. What's most important next to look at is in terms of our negative feedback loop and understanding pituitary function, we're going to look at the precursors LH and FSH. Where these connect is essentially if the pituitary is getting a mixed signal in terms of from the hypothalamus and gonadotropin releasing hormone. If we have low levels of LH and FSH, it's not really signaling to the body the requisite amounts that we would need for testosterone production. So when you have that shut down, a good example is typically in the case of exogenous testosterone use, TRT, HRT, or even in the case of anabolic steroids, we will see a reduction in LH levels and FSH levels, which is going to impact the feedback loop that we have here. Luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone are slightly different. I would probably pay more attention to follicle stimulating hormone if we were concerned on a level of fertility or the production and health of sperm quality and spermatogenesis, relative to just LH is going to be more of that straight precursor. Oftentimes you'll see HCG administration. HCG is simply an analog or synonym. It is an external substance that acts. It is LH in the body. LH and FSH are going to be single-digit numbers, where oftentimes, ideally, we're going to have our free testosterone in double digits. Some labs will measure this from approximately 9 to 26. You'll see other places do this as a percentage. And then total testosterone, as we mentioned, typically we're going to want this to be several hundred. Oftentimes labs will be in the 300 to 1100 reference range, and this will vary from lab to lab depending on LabCorp, Quest, SpectraCell, et cetera. Lastly, we'll have SHBG, prolactin, and cortisol as our other hormonal markers. SHBG, once again, stands for sex hormone binding globulin. So the key here, focus on the B, binding globulin, just like with TBG or in thyroid health, we're looking at thyroid binding globulin. What this means is the higher SHBG is, the less free or unbound testosterone there is. The lower SHBG is, the more free or unbound testosterone there would be. Prolactin is also another hormone to pay attention to. You can see this in the case of a pituitary prolactinoma, which would be a small pituitary tumor giving off excess prolactin. We may also see elevated prolactin levels almost as a pseudo-stress hormone. This sometimes will become elevated because of that, but usually what we're looking at is prolactin levels, SHBG levels, as what signs of external stress or what symptoms are we seeing that would impact total free testosterone. SHBG is really that direct relationship. Prolactin is somewhat indirect. We oftentimes you'll see this treated with something like a dopamine agonist, which will sort of inhibit and work in opposition of that prolactin. Last but not least, we're going to talk about cortisol. This can be measured as salivary cortisol. There are urine metabolites of cortisol. We can also do blood measures of this marker as well. The reason it's important to pay attention to cortisol is it's going to give you insights on the circadian rhythm. A high morning cortisol is what we want. We want a significant cortisol awakening response, which is where the majority of our cortisol output should be for the day. Oftentimes in executives or professionals or even athletes, what you might see at times is being wired and tired at night with low morning cortisol levels. We can remedy this by making changes to sleep, caffeine, and nutrition, and even potentially looking at the types of foods being selected, nutrient timing when we're eating them. But cortisol is very important to pay attention to because it can ultimately impact all of these other markers as well. Cortisol, as we've discussed throughout this masterclass, has the potential to impact testosterone, thyroid hormone, free testosterone, and also what's going on in terms of LH and FSH. We also look at cortisol as something that would inhibit star protein in our mitochondria, which regulates that cholesterol transfer. And cholesterol is a key precursor to ultimately producing these androgens. For men's health in general and male health, I do like to pay attention to a couple other markers, even if they are not solely directly related. You may want to look at cholesterol just because if there are any cholesterol lowering medications being involved or someone is being prescribed a statin drug, you're going to be able to pay attention to that in relationship to their testosterone. Not that you are going to regulate that course of treatment, that's going to be done by their cardiologist or their primary care physician. but you can potentially jump in here and just start to see and monitor and track that for your client kind of objectively as a third-party viewer. Some other markers in addition to that cholesterol we talked about, typically we're going to want to look at liver and kidney enzymes. This will also give you a good idea if it's someone who's an athlete, potentially, especially in the bodybuilding industry, we will see elevation in liver enzymes. Liver and cholesterol health are very closely interrelated due to the liver producing a vast amount of our cholesterol in the body. So we're going to want to pay attention to these and also just make sure we're remedying that. We do know that liver and gut health do impact a lot with our thyroid hormones and also the clearance of estrogen. So paying attention to all of these is going to be very important. We're also going to look at A1C and blood glucose because high levels of inflammation, high levels of blood glucose are once again signaling that response where we're ending up in a position where potentially we're elevating cortisol, we're sending mixed signals to the brain. So keeping these in a healthy range is going to be important for longevity and ultimately knowing what we need to do from a dietary approach to help improve total testosterone. And if we know that someone has low A1C and relatively well balanced blood glucose, it gives us a tool that we can use, which is insulin or carbohydrates, in order to potentially drive down cortisol at specific times. Lastly, we move to inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein. This is going to be especially important with andropause or in the case of systemic inflammation. I like to use CRP as an overall men's health measure, but based on everything that we've talked about with the hormones, it really will give you some additional insight into how things are working from the standpoint of systemic inflammation and cardiac inflammation specifically. Usually you'll see this as C-reactive protein, CRP or CRP to albumin ratio. Both of these are kind of different markers, but can be used in your toolbox to assess your client's labs. And then last but not least, we do have estradiol. So typically, your sensitive estradiol is one of three estrogens. We have estradiol, estrone, and estriol. By measuring estradiol, we can see the conversion or the aromatization from testosterone and estrogen. This is going to impact that free testosterone that's available. If we see very high levels of conversions, we can suspect a few different cases of things that may be going on as we've discussed through this masterclass. So be sure to include these on your male client labs so you can make sure that you're really optimizing everything. For the purposes of this masterclass, we won't dive into everything that should be checked on the thyroid panel because that is covered in the thyroid masterclass. You should know that that should be checked, but these are the main things that we're looking at for testosterone. If you have someone who is hypothyroid, be sure to check that TSH, T3, T4, and potentially reverse T3 as well. Hopefully this information is helpful to you. You should be able to pull this and potentially use it in your functional blood biochemistry with your clients. When thinking about adaptive physiology or working with a client, whether it's a case of chronic stress, elevated cortisol, hypothyroidism, or a gut issue, it's very helpful to think of the client in the perspective of drains versus charges, or sympathetic versus parasympathetic inputs. Though this extends beyond the nervous system, which is why I suggest using drains, which would include those sympathetic inputs or things that require a lot of energy or recovery. And then your parasympathetic side would be things that charge you. So think of something as simple as your iPhone. You need to plug that in and recharge it every single day. So think of a client in the same mechanism. We can use something as simple as a T-chart, which we'll dive into a specific client case here so that you can see how we would potentially divide that up and categorize using a hypothetical example of where different things fall on the spectrum. When thinking about something like gut permeability, inflammation, external stressors, chronic infections, or otherwise, what we have to remember is the negative feedback loop that we discussed at the beginning of this masterclass. The hormonal system or endocrinology in our body runs on a very delicate negative feedback loop. What that means is that basically one hormone impacts another hormone. Specific foreign invaders or external stressors will signal the brain to react a specific way. This is a combination of safety theory and adaptive physiology that we talked about. So on the board now, I'm going to kind of recap that feedback system, what's interacting between our hypothalamus or our brain, our pituitary, and then ultimately either our reproductive glands or organs or our thyroid, which is going to obviously release thyroid hormone. When all of these are working together, we can see how essentially stress would impact the feedback loop, and then we'll go through and look at some things that would fall on the drains section of this T-chart, and then also the charges section of this T-chart. So using the example that we just talked about, I like to divide the body into different categories. If you were to think of your body as a military or army, we essentially have your generals, which oftentimes are the brain or the gut. We have captains like your thyroid, your adrenal glands, and your gonads, or essentially reproductive organs. And then lastly, we have soldiers. So these are the cells and mitochondria that are essentially executing these day-to-day activities that are somewhat influenced by hormones and these signals that are being sent throughout our body. So a quick refresher, the generals would serve as the H in this when we're talking about the hypothalamus that lies in the brain. We have our pituitary gland, which is then going to receive signals from the hypothalamus as it's sensing our external environment, which is then going to feed individually into the thyroid, the adrenals, and then in this case in males, since obviously we do not have ovaries, what we're specifically talking about in terms of reproductive organs, it would be your testicular function. And then that would then trigger things like, for example, star protein would transfer cholesterol inside the mitochondria. This is inhibited by cortisol. So this is where the adrenals would begin to impact things on a cellular level in terms of that regulation of cholesterol transfer. When we're talking about thyroid or hypothyroidism, as we discussed in our adaptive physiology section, ultimately, when that lower thyroid begins to impact luteinizing hormone, that is essentially the signal from the pituitary here to our reproductive organs so that we know essentially what we're supposed to produce, when we're supposed to produce it, and what tasks are being executed overall. So being mindful of this, we really have to think about what is acting on the hypothalamus or these generals over here. With the brain, it's going to be sensing stressors in our external environment. It's basically as simple as that. It comes back to safety theory and really just what's going on around us, whether that's lack of food, too much exercise, too much food, too little exercise. These come down to our habits and the way that we're managing our day-to-day function as a human. Where the pituitary comes in is it's going to ultimately receive that signal from the hypothalamus, which then influences some of the hormones that we've talked about in this course, but specifically how the adrenals, thyroid, all kind of tie back and interconnect with our reproductive hormones and reproductive function. Secondly, we talked about inflammation, gut permeability. How does this relate in terms of testosterone levels? So you see here, if you think of the gut as a general working with the brain, perceiving our external environment, what becomes our internal environment in terms of, we always talk about you are what you eat. When you are assimilating those nutrients and that nutrition inside your body, our gut is going to have a response. If there's an inflammatory response, we're essentially triggering the body with stressors. This could be in the form of inflammatory cytokines, interleukin-6, all sorts of inflammatory markers that you will see pop up in the body. And then these start to radiate this additional response. We can see how this starts to feed down through our military or our army that we're thinking about in terms of our body, our internal physiology, and our hormones. So ultimately, while this can be really complicated, how are you going to explain that to a client? It's very hard to teach them. As you can imagine, you are watching this masterclass, which has quite a bit of information in it. You're not going to have the ability to necessarily sit down with a client for this long, teach them the entire aspects of testosterone production, thyroid, adrenals, and hypothalamus. They're just going to want to know what they need to do, tangible action steps and things that you can use to evaluate them when you receive their intake forms, when you have their check-ins, biofeedback, and things of that nature. This is where drains and charges come in. So think of it as a T-chart here. If you're working with a specific client, we have our drains to the system. And the way that I like to think of this so that you can remember the S part is it's also going to include sympathetic activities such as too much exercise, drains on the nervous system, high levels of chronic stress. Even acute stress can potentially be a drain as well, so we want to pay attention to that. Besides drains, we also have our charge, which I like to think of charge being positive. So charge, as we mentioned earlier, just like any electronic device that you have where you need to essentially charge it back up to 100% each day, our body requires certain charges or systems or parasympathetic inputs is a way to think of it in terms of your nervous system. So drains being sympathetic, charge positive is P, so that helps to remember the para side of the system as well. So coming back to this, obviously when we talk about the nervous system, that's going to act on the brain, but also anytime you've been nervous or anxious, I'm sure you kind of remember the feeling or sensation of maybe that even hit you in the gut or you had butterflies or things of that nature. So the gut is not necessarily immune from that stress response either. It's ultimately also filtering all of that external stress on our body in the form of food that we eat and inflammation that could be occurring and kind of radiating throughout our body. So drains, the example we talked about earlier, so, lack of food, we have, I would consider too much food to also be a drain, because if we develop something like insulin resistance or an inability to regulate blood glucose, that is ultimately going to drain our body because it's putting a lot of stress. If you think about when we get to here, our captains, which are then emitting hormones, so we have T4 coming off of here in the thyroid, adrenals are going to be producing hormones as well, and then lastly, like the pituitary stimulating our reproductive organs to signal hormones. That's where you have to remember that these signals are basically just little chemical messengers. So in the case of too much food, what we're developing there is insulin resistance. And while the pancreas is kind of a separate gland, we'd still essentially be sensing the rise and fall of blood sugar in our body. So it still kind of falls back to the same example of generals, captains, and soldiers. So we have lack of food, too much food. We have exercise, or we can put training here. There are going to be some forms that are going to be restorative and some forms that are not necessarily restorative. For charge, we have all sorts of different recovery modalities. So eating can also be a positive charge when it is nutrient dense, very efficient food, easily assimilated by your body. That can fall into a charge. Contrast hydrotherapy or relaxation, mindfulness, all would fall into this charge category because you're stimulating the brain. When we're talking about food, you're charging, repairing, and ultimately maintaining healthy gut function. And as we mentioned earlier, inflammation and gut permeability can impact the aromatization, conversion of testosterone to estrogen. This is where this really all starts to interconnect. So I want you to sort of think of either a client example of your own, or as you're following along here, seeing how certain drains impact the gut. They impact the brain, which then impact the thyroid, adrenals, and even our reproductive function. So training, what can ultimately happen here is with training, we could essentially have high levels of muscle protein breakdown. We could have elevations in cortisol when the adrenals are doing that. And cortisol, as we mentioned, inhibits star protein, which is then influencing the mitochondria. We have these little receptors and satellites for estrogen as well. So if someone is obese or we have this increased aromatization because of inflammation and poor decisions as it pertains to our gut, we're now influencing our body as well because we have estrogen receptors all over our body in our cells. As we discussed earlier, we have thyroid, essentially thyroid receptors all over our body too. So these don't live in a vacuum. So while we are teaching the mechanism of testosterone production and focusing on androgens, I really want you to maintain a big picture here. So charge could be mindfulness. We could talk about anti-inflammatory foods, because obviously if we're talking about inflammation, we want to think about, okay, what is not inflammatory? So on this other end of the spectrum, we have anti-inflammatory foods. We have, for charge, it could be something like gentle yoga or restorative physical activity or walking can actually improve insulin sensitivity just in the sense that it's movement. There have been studies where folks have been on a calorie-controlled diet, and just the level of movement that they experience could reduce something like type 2 diabetes. So don't underestimate how a charge, something as simple as movement, can serve as a charge for your body. And this is where being a coach and having a keen understanding of things like volume and periodization come into play, because ultimately, a drain can be a charge. Food can be a charge, it can be a drain. Exercise can be a charge or it can be a drain as well. So really what's up to you is to manage this for your client, and then you're tracking the biofeedback, you're tracking the labs and overall check-ins to make sure you're maintaining their health over the long term. So thinking of some other examples beyond mindfulness, anti-inflammatory foods, we can also use supplementation. So a charge in this case might be repairing the gut health. We mentioned glutamine or curcumin can be helpful. Adaptogens can serve as a charge because they're going to act on the pituitary, brain, and hypothalamus once we start to factor in that negative feedback loop. So supplements can also fall over here as well. In addition to mindfulness and anti-inflammatory foods and supplements, we also have things like time management and scheduling. It's crazy how this isn't necessarily meditation or something that you would think of as incredibly restorative, but if it's pulling stress off of the body, which is our ultimate goal as a coach, we're ultimately benefiting this section, which is going to have this trigger or domino effect towards the rest of the body and ultimately our hormones throughout the body. So we have supplements, we have mindfulness, anti-inflammatory foods, things like time management. That's where support is important. Charge can come in the form of music. It can come in the form of relationships, community, socialization. So those you could argue, would fall kind of under mindfulness or a brain component, but we're going to put things like social connection, relationships, are all going to influence someone's health and ultimately their hormones and then response, and then that interrelates with neurotransmitters and everything. So I think you can start to see how, in the case of someone who's maybe eating very inflammatory foods, does not have mindfulness practices or time management, is not active, does not walk, has poor insulin sensitivity, increased aromatization, higher levels of estrogen in the body, starts to really feel down on themselves, develop things like anxiety, depression, and have mental health issues, which all sort of tie back to these drains and charges and ultimately these inputs that you're going to be able to control as a coach. So when someone comes to you, make sure you're zooming out and maintaining this perspective as you move through their protocols. An example of another drain besides inflammation, we mentioned infections earlier. So hidden infections are still going to be signaling the brain and the gut in a similar fashion. In addition to overtraining, we also have lack of sleep being a similar effect to overtraining. Lack of sleep can reduce testosterone production by a significant percentage. We're also looking at reduced insulin sensitivity. So this means our tolerance of carbohydrates would be decreased. So over here, lack of sleep is going to be a drain. And we have restorative sleep or slow wave sleep, a significant amount of sleep, serving as a charge or parasympathetic input. Ultimately, the sleep is going to feed back into the system, help with their brain. Also, sleep is a time when you're fasting. Fasting can also serve as a break for a gut. This is another great example of drains and charges is fasting in itself, because intermittent fasting in some cases is going to help people with essentially alleviating certain gut issues. But for someone with a thyroid issue or someone who really needs to be eating smaller, more frequent meals, fasting may actually serve as a drain. So be careful, because different things can go in different categories depending on the person. This is where having a keen understanding of your client is going to be very, very important so that you can really identify where to put each stimulus, signal, or recovery modality. So I'm going to put this here as well. And I'm writing these, but obviously saying these out loud so that you guys can be taking notes in your outlines and in your notes at home. So see how fasting could obviously be a lack of food, but if you had a lot of inflammation in the body or you wanted to improve insulin sensitivity, a calorie deficit or lack of food or lack of inflammatory foods is actually going to help someone that has too much of that inflammation going on in their body. So these are about 5 or 6 examples on each side that you should really be able to take and plug and play and think of specific examples that you're going to be able to use within your coaching practice. So once again, drains relates to those sympathetic nervous system inputs, Drains are also inflammation, infection, and basically taking poor care of your body. On the charges side, we have both parasympathetic activities, but we also have specific protocols. So you could have supplements, you can also have mindfulness, time management, et cetera. So this is going to be very person dependent, and hopefully you can take this and apply it to your own practice and your own clients as well. So specifically using the same exact table, but applying it to 2 examples, we could think of how someone like a male CrossFit athlete who's maybe overtraining and undereating would differ significantly from someone who's maybe very sedentary but has a lot of stress from their work environment and is eating highly inflammatory foods. So starting with that second example, the latter example, a drain for that person is cafeteria food, fast food, the inflammatory food choices that they're making, the allergens that they're consuming in their diet, or adjuvants that are essentially creating that gut permeability and the issues that are then signaling the body to release more cortisol. So drains here, we could simplify this as their cortisol output, but what is it coming from? It's actually coming from their life and their food choices as opposed to their movement. So this example 1, let's assume sedentary, overweight male, as opposed to example 2, we're gonna walk through how drains and charges would apply to an athlete. So here we had cortisol, we also had their food serving as a drain. Maybe they do sleep, but that's probably one of the only charges that they have. So really what we want to start to do is balance out this column. So think of it almost as, you need to balance the scales of justice. So here, how we add balance if there's an excess of drains is to add charges. So maybe this person can walk. Maybe they can add in some form, maybe they enjoy music or they enjoy some form of meditation or social time with friends, and adding that in. Let's say our sedentary individuals typically copes with significant amounts of alcohol. That can also be a gut irritant, which is essentially going to fall into the drains category. Alcohol can also impact the production of testosterone and impact sleep, which then impacts recovery. Sleep is also where we're doing a lot of the healing and production process for a hormone like testosterone, which is why it's really vital to emphasize the importance of that with your clients as you're walking through. So let's say we need to increase his sleep. So he is sleeping, but maybe it's not enough. Maybe he needs to get up above 7 hours instead of 6 hours, or 8 hours instead of 5 hours. We're going to put those goals on the parasympathetic or charge side for this particular person. So increased sleep, and increased activity and food choices may actually improve sleep quality. Oftentimes with overweight individuals, you have things like sleep apnea or acid reflux or other things that are happening in the evening that even though they're in bed, they're not necessarily sleeping as well as they could be. That lack of sleep, that increase in cortisol production, those food choices and alcohol are now starting to have this ripple effect where testosterone levels are compromised. We're also going to see drains likely in the form of a sedentary overweight individual with increased aromatization and estrogen levels, as well as poor insulin sensitivity. So what can we do to improve that? Being strategic with our supplementation. So using something that's maybe a natural anti-aromatase and also supports testosterone, like Uricomia longfolia jack, which is long jack. We could also use something like ashwagandha. We can also implement something that's more targeted at estrogen, like DIM. And we could also look at the insulin sensitivity, which would be something like berberine, can really improve both the condition of the gut and insulin resistance in the body. So we're gonna put supplements as the charge to start balancing this out. So you can see how supplements may apply for one person, but not necessarily another person. In addition to drains and charges, I like to think of, okay, what are they doing for work? If they're sitting in front of a computer, can we add something like an accessory, like an application, a blue light blocking set of glasses, or something on the computer or on the phone that's going to actually change the type of light, because we know that the optic nerves are very sensitive to that blue light, impacts melatonin and sleep as well. So this is a case where something as simple as blue light glasses can serve as a charge, even though it's something totally external to the body that will have a ripple effect on circadian rhythm and ultimately hormonal production. So maybe we put something like blue light blocking glasses. Likely from his stress and poor dietary choices, we may even be seeing some sort of thyroid condition, in which case healing that and addressing that is also going to serve to sort of feedback here. So using our sedentary overweight male as an example, we've got negative signals of stress or high levels of stress occurring in both the brain and the gut. With our knowledge of adaptive physiology, we know that poor food choices, let's say lots of dairy and lots of high calorie foods and mixed meals with just different types of fats, that maybe he has more omega-6 fatty acids, maybe he has a lot of gluten and he actually has a history of celiacs or some sort of gluten intolerance in his family. That would be an example of we're now triggering a stress response in the gut, which will ultimately alert the rest of the body. Moving from the brain down, knowing that he has higher levels of stress, maybe not the best sleep quality, we're going to notice cortisol production in the adrenals. This is ultimately going to impact testosterone production, and also that cortisol is going to impact the conversion of T4 to T3, which is now impacting metabolism, weight gain, and overall fat accumulation, which then all the way comes back to estrogen, or potentially having a little bit more dominant profile in terms of estrogen, or that ratio of testosterone to estrogen. So that's something that's super important to pay attention to, are the ratios of these hormones. And you can see how these all start to connect together between sleep, insulin resistance, increased levels of estrogen, aromatization from testosterone to estrogen, and adrenal function as we're sort of working through the specific example. Next, we're going to move to someone maybe who is a CrossFit athlete, potentially very lean, underweight, maybe not following appropriate nutritional periodization or strategies. So using this here, the same drain would exist. His lack of food would likely be a drain. So this is a perceived stressor. Our body goes into that safety mode, adaptive physiology. We think there's a lack of food around, and maybe he is eating fairly clean. He's eating, let's say he's eating paleo and he doesn't have a lot of gut inflammation. There's still some level at which stress can impact the gut, and our body is looking at this stress systemically. So remember not to look at these as mechanisms, but a whole entire picture in which these mechanisms and signals fit into this great machine and orchestra really that is the human body. So using him, drain is lack of food. Maybe he's overtraining. Because he's invested so much into his training, maybe there's some sort of financial stress in his life, and it's not so much that it's work stress, but there are just other forms of demands that would impact him in terms of brain and cognitively overall. What we know about overtraining is certain levels of overtraining and extreme endorphin production from a lot of endurance activity can blunt testosterone production because we're mitigating the production of luteinizing hormone. So for him, his overtraining is actually a drain, and we need some charging activities. Maybe he needs something restorative, some essentially days off or deloads. Maybe he needs something like yoga, or even Pilates could essentially be something where he could be active. Walking could be a charge and still allows him to have some non-exercise related energy expenditure or non-exercise related physical activity without totally impacting his recovery, and we'll see here how this can begin to show up in the hormonal profile. With that overtraining that we talked about, when we start to have luteinizing hormone issues and testosterone issues, remember the male body can't produce testosterone by itself. What ends up happening is we have to convert testosterone to estrogen. When there's not a lot of testosterone and our estrogen conversion decreases, we now have not only low testosterone, we also have low estrogen. Pair this with high amounts of stress in the form of SHBG, which can start to kind of trickle up in the body, and we now have someone who has probably low free testosterone, low estrogen, and then low total testosterone. Where this begins to show up is then in mental health. It's actually very common that low testosterone and low estrogen can impact anxiety because serotonin is so closely related to estrogen and where we have estrogen receptors and the role and interaction of that hormone and neurotransmitter in our brain. So for him, maybe he needs something that's positive. He needs to have a morning routine or something that he's essentially grateful for to start to shift that mindset and put in a charge activity. So maybe we put morning routine over here. we add yoga to essentially assist with the mobility and process, or maybe it's Ramwad or something similar. We have a mobility. We're going to reverse diet to essentially eliminate some of the stress. So a reverse diet could fall as a charge for someone who is under eating. We mentioned overtraining. Maybe we need to go through a strength accessory or hypertrophy phase as opposed to continuing high levels of CrossFit or trying to accomplish all of these specific training goals and different modalities all at the same time. So we're going to look at training periodization. Due to overtraining and trying to fit in 2-a-days and the stress he was experiencing, maybe he had sleep disturbances. He was also super lean. Maybe he hit a point of elevated cortisol because in the middle of the night, if we have low levels of blood glucose, our body's going to essentially wake us up to try and replenish that liver glycogen and overall glycogen and carbohydrate stores in the body. So now maybe we have over here lack of sleep. So with this individual, whereas the focus here was on insulin sensitivity, if he's very lean, he likely has good insulin sensitivity. So maybe we focus on implementing something that's going to support circadian rhythm, support increased or improved sleep quality and length and duration of sleep. So we'll put something specific for supplementation over here. And then likely he's going to need an adaptogen just from the cumulative volume of stress that he's had on his body from training. So we might look at something like rhodiola, potentially up to even 1 gram. We may look at KSM ashwagandha. We could use something like theanine in the evening or other basically relaxing compounds, specific types of magnesium, whether it's glycinate or other forms of the mineral that end in ATE. So chelated minerals, glycinate or orotate may be a great option for this specific person. And in his case, he's also doing a lot of intense training. So we want to make sure that that's supported with proper supplementation. So we're looking at potentially a sleep aid and adaptogen under supplements, which will serve as a charge. And while we're primarily focused on the training and nutrition side, we mentioned earlier his CrossFit training, the amount of time he was investing in that. He had some level of financial stress. So maybe we need to encourage him to balance out other areas of his life as kind of this 3-dimensional human. We may not be the best person to give him that advice, but maybe we outsource to a financial professional, or he needs a budget or something that's going to essentially pull stress off of the body and serve as a charge. So you are somewhat limited in your scope, but you are still looking out for the best interest of the client in terms of how these two balance. And you can begin to see how what served as a charge in one case, which is adding food, would not necessarily help that sedentary individual. These are kind of two ends of the spectrum, two extremes, but you begin to see how one person may need to fast and become more active. One person does not need to fast at all, needs to eat a lot more and reduce their activity level. So using the same table, it's broadly applicable to all of these different clients. And then coming back here, when we begin to look at these signals of our generals all the way through down to our cell, by reverse dieting him, we're impacting the thyroid. We're also using insulin, a counter-regulatory hormone, to bring down levels of cortisol by essentially increasing carbohydrate levels in the body. Also providing more food, more dietary fats, overall calorie intake, where potentially our goal would be to increase his testosterone level, as well as having that cortisol reduction. We're also upregulating that thyroid conversion, which is going to help him as an athlete essentially assimilate more food and support his training in the long term. When we look at his overtraining, that could have been impacting the gut. And so by pulling some of that stress off the body, we're now looking at maybe a reduced risk of incidence of something like irritable bowel syndrome or some of the other things that'll come up in athletes who are overtraining and either eating the wrong types of foods or a number of other variables. When we're looking at adding in his supplements, we're impacting both the brain and the gut in the sense that we're able to improve neurotransmitter health, we're able to improve sleep quality, and then essentially with additional sleep, we've now improved insulin sensitivity further for the reverse diet. With additional sleep, we've now optimized the potential to create testosterone during that sleep and recovery process. And hopefully we'll see this in the improvement as we're tracking with lab levels, biofeedback. For both of these clients, we're gonna look at things like hunger, energy, cravings, strength, libido, especially if we're looking at testosterone. So hunger, energy, strength, mood, libido, all can tie into that, and also exercise performance if we're looking in the case of an athlete. So specifically using this box, we've now opened up this wide array that we can use to examine, but then remember to put these inputs back through here based on the knowledge of hormones that we've covered in this masterclass, specifically on testosterone, and how thyroid and adrenals impact testosterone, how insulin resistance and cortisol can impact testosterone. Because ultimately, if you're looking at it super mechanistically and all you do is throw an adaptogen at someone or a testosterone boosting compound, that doesn't fix these other ends of the spectrum, and you're not going to see the same level of increase as you would if you really gain control and managed this entire process, whether it's in an overweight individual or male, an aging male, or whether it's in someone who's perhaps exercising too much. Breaking it down in this specific case is going to be most helpful. And then always remember, essentially with our brain, you're going to have this command center up here feeding down into your different hormones, or excuse me, into your pituitary gland, and then ultimately that feedback loop coming back. So brain, your thyroid and adrenals, and ultimately reproductive organs, obviously all in different places, but very sensitive to the signal, and then will ultimately impact what's going on at a cellular level, and then feeding back through here. So hopefully those two examples provided you with some solid context for how to implement this. And they're two very common examples that you're going to see in your coaching practice if you are specifically working with males, regardless of age and kind of regardless of your focus area. They are probably two of the most common scenarios that you'll be able to work through using this knowledge. Supplementation naturally can help to improve male hormonal function and testosterone optimization. We've listed several different types of supplements, and they all act in various manners. While we don't necessarily have any herbal ingredients that specifically act on the hypothalamus to release GnRH, by working from the bottom up, we can begin to start to understand this process and implement supplements depending on what clients are experiencing. Most of our herbal products are going to act in a way that helps to reduce the amount of bound testosterone, so we can lessen SHBG with things like ashwagandha or avena sativa, which is an oat extract. We can reduce the conversion of testosterone to estrogen using something like DIM or a Eurycoma longfolia or fenugreek. All have some anti-aromatase properties, because remember, the male body does not naturally produce estrogen. We have to convert testosterone to estrogen. So if that's something that's happening, and we're seeing that in client labs or clients with higher levels of body fat, in addition to making sure that the macronutrient profile is on point, healthy fats are available, we may want to take specific steps to help lessen the conversion to estrogen or bound to albumin or SHBG. In terms of other supplements, we can not necessarily increase LH specifically, but we can signal the hypothalamus if there are lower estrogen levels, or you're taking something to help with aromatase inhibition. You are going to feed back up through the chain and then back down. So some of the supplements we've covered were ashwagandha, which ashwagandha is acting primarily here at this testosterone level. It's always good to look for a KSM 66 or sensoril ashwagandha. Dosing is going to vary based on size, but typically a lot of the clinical studies are above 600 milligrams. We've talked about aromatase inhibition and estrogen. DIM, most dosing will start around 300 milligrams for DIM. Fenugreek is going to be above 500 milligrams of something like a testofen extract. And then we'll also have Eurycoma longfolia jack, which comes in different 100 to 1 or 200 to 1 extracts, but specifically we will need at least 300 milligrams or more of the Eurycoma longfolia, which is also known as long jack. So typically clients can more easily find long jack that way. So by doing this, you're slowly making shifts in the testosterone profile. Clients will notice a difference in terms of well-being, libido, performance, recovery, because they're having more free testosterone and by increasing and fighting that percentage. Sometimes you'll notice a difference in the total amount of testosterone as well, which could be a result of this feedback loop working in our favor. So that is the best way to specifically address from a supplementation standpoint. When you're looking at labs, what we would be looking at are the total free testosterone measures. LH and FSH will help give us a gauge of just part of the equation, but really what we're looking at with supplements is primarily going to be E2 estradiol, SHBG, which is sex hormone binding globulin. We might even want to check prolactin. And overall, this is all going to tie into impacting free testosterone through supplementation. One of the most important elements of the client application section of this masterclass is understanding how to use labs and biofeedback to steer your clients towards their goals and optimize their hormonal profile. So oftentimes you'll have biofeedback regularly, such as every week, biweekly, or monthly. Labs are going to be harder to come by, so the key is to pair the biofeedback that we've talked about, accumulating it in both a quantitative and qualitative manner, so getting them to write out subjectively how they're feeling, but objectively ranking on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, how their sleep, energy levels, and performance in the gym are compared to previous check-ins, and you can look at subsequent check-ins after that to establish their baseline. So because you'll have biofeedback more often, that's going to be the status quo for you as a coach, and then comparing those lab numbers to wherever they're registering with their biofeedback. If you're lucky, you'll have a client who's able to get their labs done several times per year, but oftentimes that's not the case. You may only have 1 or 2 labs to work with. So understanding how clients are feeling subjectively going into those labs or after those labs can give you an idea of whether they're improving or not. Because most importantly, we're treating the symptoms of feeling low testosterone or having androgen deficiency or decreased performance or not reaching our body composition goals. We've talked about specific client labs that we should have drawn, which include total testosterone, free testosterone, SHBG, prolactin, luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and then also checking things like your hydroxyvitamin D and potentially even looking at DHEA levels or salivary cortisol. What's going to tell you what needs to be tested, assuming the client has to order this in an a la carte fashion or something not covered by insurance, is generally from that biofeedback log, you can see if you want to look at specific cortisol issues, if you're trying to look at estrogen issues, if you have a client who's maybe carrying a bit more weight or is overweight or obese, you're going to definitely want to include estrogen on that panel. If you have a client who's on hormone replacement, it's unlikely that you would even want to look at LH or FSH unless that client was looking for fertility or considering possibly adding to their family or trying to conceive, because LH and FSH coming from the pituitary would be shut off, knowing our science that the pituitary signals the testicles to create testosterone with the pulse of luteinizing hormone. So luteinizing hormone being pulsatory would be shut off with that TRT. So having a client on TRT order LH and FSH is probably unnecessary unless their doctor has them on something like HCG, which is helping to preserve intratesticular testosterone, or basically serving as something that's analogous to LH. HCG is very similar to LH. So if that's added with their treatment plan on their TRT, you may see that they still have something floating around in their body, but that's not really their LH per se. Their LH would be shut off from the exogenous testosterone, and they would have intratesticular testosterone. So that would be an example of maybe you don't need to order FSH and LH for that client, but you still want to check total testosterone, free testosterone, things like prolactin. SHBG is going to be important as well if you're having higher levels from a testosterone replacement. If you're having a client who is naturally having lower testosterone levels, you may want to examine, is SHBG the culprit? Are we having more testosterone aromatized into estrogen or E2, that's sensitive estradiol? Or it could be higher prolactin, because as we discussed, prolactin can actually have an inhibitory effect on LH and FSH. So that's how those labs interrelate together, and it's how you can take a client-by-client approach to creating a complete lab order for that client, or making sure they know what to order from their doctor when they're going to their physician's office. So the best case scenario is obviously you're able to have all the labs, or you have a Dutch test or something super comprehensive, or they come to you after an annual physical. But if that's not the case and the client is going to have to order out of pocket, you may want to pick particular things that you want to look for based off that biofeedback log that we've talked about in the application section. So as part of this masterclass, I wanted to include a frequently asked questions section to cover common client issues, questions that I get from other coaches, and also sometimes even questions from athletes or clients themselves. So my first frequently asked question will be labs. How often should I monitor labs? This is going to be dependent on the individual and how severe their problem is. Someone who is borderline in need of replacement probably only has a set period of time where they can attempt to restore those levels before they need to seriously consider some sort of pharmaceutical intervention or having a physician look at their levels and undergo some sort of treatment strategy or plan. The labs for your average client or average male, I would say at the bare minimum once per year. Ideally, if we can find a way to get labs done twice per year, that would be great. I think for athletes, it's an intelligent idea to monitor it during different training cycles. So if you have an off season, seeing what your off season or recovery hormonal profile is so that you have a baseline based on your non-competitive season. It's probably wise as well to test your hormones during your competitive season so that you can keep a pulse on everything and see if you're having a huge fluctuation when you're having these increased demands, greater stress response, higher training volume, and potentially shifts with your nutrition. Ideally though, knowing that that training volume is coming, you would uptick or increase the macros and total calorie intake in order to support the demands from the added volume. But for athletes, I do recommend potentially a off-season and in-season blood work so that you can keep a pulse on both times of year to see what the athlete may need. For the average male, if they can go more than once, that's fantastic. Most of the time, if you're doing blood work through insurance, you're going to be able to go once per year through the physical, or your TRT clients will be able to do what is called a med management appointment. So periodically, either throughout a quarter or biannually, they will be able to get those labs checked so that you can keep a pulse on things like hematocrit levels and total testosterone as well. A second question that's quite common, because we discussed the relationship between slow wave sleep, testosterone, and growth hormone production, as well as the impact of sleep apnea. A common question I'll get from clients and coaches is, what supplements should I be using to optimize sleep? And the question is, it does vary depending on the person and sometimes your neurotransmitter levels, but some quality sleep supplements, as I mentioned, L-theanine and phosphatidylserine can help to reduce cortisol in the evening. Ashwagandha can balance your circadian rhythm. But as far as specific sleep-only supplements, L-theanine, L-tryptophan, 5-HTP, which stands for 5-hydroxytryptophan, and some GABA derivatives have been shown to improve slow-wave sleep. So GABA and phenibut are both crucial for getting into that deeper sleep or slow wave sleep as you're moving through multiple stages of sleep each night. The one thing to note about phenibut is it's not recommended that you stay on it for long periods of time or cycles longer than a week or two. So you'd be rotating that with other sleep aids such as GABA, L-theanine, L-tryptophan, potentially if you were adding in melatonin or something like that. Ideally, with your sleep protocol though, the top thing is your lifestyle. So having either blue light blocking glasses or flux on your computer to essentially reduce the amount of blue light exposure that you're experiencing in the evenings. By reducing that blue light exposure, you increase melatonin production naturally and potentially lessen your need for a sleep aid. But if people need to correct their sleep issues right away, potentially get into a deeper sleep, I do recommend adding some sleep supplements as a potential alternative. You will find clients that are potentially using anxiety medication, or they're using heavy doses of Ambien or other types of sleep aids to try and sleep, but it doesn't necessarily improve testosterone levels, because being knocked out is different than going through the different stages of REM sleep and slow wave sleep. And as we mentioned, slow wave sleep is really crucial for that testosterone production and everything that's going on between your hypothalamus, pituitary, and testicles as you are trying to increase testosterone production. Another common question is what should I do about carbs? We hear healthy fats are important for testosterone, but what about carbohydrates? The truth is that carbohydrates arguably are as important, but from a different perspective. So whereas fats are used as the raw materials and cholesterol base for your testosterone production or hormonal production. Carbohydrates work through the opposite mechanism because cortisol is essentially a hormone that breaks down things in your body, whether that be muscle or just creating an environment of breaking things down for energy. Carbs and insulin work in opposition of cortisol. So if you can use carbohydrates to oppose cortisol for someone who's having high stress levels and cortisol issues, you can bring their testosterone levels potentially to a better place just by changing that diversion in the pathway. Remember, we talked about the fork in the road between testosterone and cortisol. You could be coming down this pathway and having a lot of negative conversion going on. So carbohydrates at the right time, particularly around training, I think for the natural athlete can be very, very powerful for testosterone production, even if it's in a very indirect manner. There are a lot of links that you have to connect to get back to testosterone, but you think of carbohydrates and amino acids as providing those raw materials or building blocks. The body senses that food is present. With that food present, you can potentially move into a parasympathetic state around training, reduce muscle protein breakdown, reduce cortisol production. If you do that time after time after time, you may see improvements, even if it may not be as drastic as some other areas. Carbohydrates are still important. Now make sure, as we talked about, because higher body fat levels can lead to aromatization into estrogen, we would be using these carbohydrate strategies with individuals who already have good fasted blood glucose levels, good insulin sensitivity, and tolerate carbohydrates well. So that is how I would view carbohydrates specifically in terms of testosterone production, how it all relates. Some of the best times are going to be pre, during, and post-workout around your training, which we can manipulate depending on what time of day you train. Our additional frequently asked question is, what about non-responsive clients? So you are going to have clients where you can provide the herbals, they can be getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep, or at least 7, and still have issues. You can reduce their training volume. Maybe it's a 3 to 4 day a week compound full body resistance training, not excessive amounts of endurance training, where you would have luteinizing hormone mitigated by endorphins and cortisol, and they're just not responding. You either are seeing a problem with FSH, LH, or maybe it's their total testosterone or their free testosterone is still very poor. This could be some type of pituitary issue or something that we are unsure of. And that's when taking the labs and going to a doctor or a trusted physician in your area or a naturopath to start to take the step beyond just nutritional protocols or supplementation protocols. You will have non-responsive clients. It could be something that happened to them earlier in life, and maybe they just weren't aware of it until working with you, it's brought it to their attention, or they understand what to look for. This can fluctuate. Obviously, there are changes in testosterone as we age. Most people who experience that type of non-responsiveness, it's either due to external supraphysiological doses of testosterone or TRT. That exogenous hormone is shutting down their system, and perhaps now if they're older, they're having a hard time bouncing back from that. Another case could be a head injury. Any type of TBI, traumatic brain injuries, are one of the biggest causes of pituitary dysregulation or misfunction and dysfunction. And through that, we can begin to start to understand why you will have some non-responsive clients. The other category is certainly things like testicular cancer or testicular trauma, or men who have prostate cancer will undergo androgen deprivation therapy, where it's essentially a medical castration of sorts. So for them, they're going to experience some changes in their testosterone levels as well. Those are definitely abnormal examples, but something to be mindful of when thinking of non-responsive clients. On a similar note with non-responsive clients, we've talked a little bit about performance-enhancing drugs and suppression today. There are becoming more and more categories of performance-enhancing drugs beyond just what people typically think of in terms of testosterone or testosterone replacement. And because of that, there are certain issues with suppression that will come up. But just know that if you have any type of hormonal derivative that you are adding to your body, whether it is oral, injectable, even testosterone replacements that are a gel, can still be suppressive on your system. So, but focusing on PED specifically, whether that is an oral steroid, a prohormone, an injectable steroid, or a selective androgen receptor modulator, oftentimes athletes use the more is better approach. And because of that, they end up with being even higher levels of suppression, especially if they're not rotating off of these drugs, or they've been on it a long time before working with you. They definitely need to see a doctor, get some blood work done, and see what their LH and FSH are doing typically the pituitary will not be signaling LH in the HPTA axis because the body has previously observed that there was testosterone present or a testosterone derivative or something similar. So that's what you need to look out for with your PED or suppression type issues if you're working with athletes or clients who might have used that in the past. In a healthy male, if your testosterone levels begin to drop from those exogenous levels, the body would notice that, begin to produce luteinizing hormone to help create more testosterone overall. So definitely something to be mindful of as you're working with those clients. Cannot emphasize enough that many of the times someone will take something that should be dosed in 3 milligrams or 10 milligrams and take 30 milligrams. That definitely has different effects than what was studied in the literature as far as pharmacology and the clinical studies that are out there. So always important to have good communication with the athlete, and even if you don't necessarily know exactly what's going on, the blood work will certainly tell you what's going on. Lastly, oftentimes get questions about the parasympathetic and sympathetic response. Is cortisol really that related to testosterone production? And the answer is yes. Stress can have a large impact on testosterone. You would want to mitigate stress to improve testosterone. There's only so many things we can do naturally between the hypothalamus, pituitary, testicular axis that by mitigating stress, we are allowing more materials to be diverted towards testosterone. By lowering stress and improving your circadian rhythm, reducing cortisol at night or being wired and tired, having proper cortisol in the morning, we're allowing us to get better sleep. Better sleep is such an important part of testosterone and growth hormone production because of slow wave sleep, that when that cortisol imbalance happens, or if you're constantly in the sympathetic state where you are wired and active as opposed to parasympathetic and rest and digest, it's going to be a lot harder to fall asleep. The sympathetic will throw off your circadian rhythm and balance or schedule throughout the day. Once that happens, it becomes this vicious cycle of producing less and less testosterone every time. So that's why you need to set those sleep goals for your clients. You need to have some sort of restoration post-workout or some sort of activities throughout the day that are going to lessen the stress response. It's also why not having caffeine later in the day or triggering that energy and cortisol is very important as well, even if you are training later. So making sure to balance those parasympathetic and sympathetic inputs. That's always a very common question I get. Well, is cortisol really that important for testosterone production? The answer is yes. Aside from the nutritional protocol, managing sleep and training stress and total life stress are some of the biggest things you can do for improving testosterone production. One of the other common questions I get as far as an FAQ is why ashwagandha? Ashwagandha is mentioned for adrenal health. It's mentioned for cortisol circadian rhythm. It's mentioned for testosterone. How can this one herb be so involved in all these different capacities? And the answer is it works to free up testosterone. So it can work in essentially that binding capacity that we talked about, where testosterone is being bound to SHBG or not being free testosterone. It's been shown also to improve that sperm motility or sperm health as far as in men when we're looking at that KSM66 or sensorol ashwagandha. Most of the time they're studying the KSM66 in a dose of at least 600 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams. And the reason ashwagandha works well as an adaptogen is because oftentimes people have these imbalances in their circadian rhythm. So whether that's being wired and tired at night or not having energy in the morning, adaptogens are designed to give you what you need based on your current profile. So for some people, it might be stimulating. For other people, it might be relaxing. The best way to try it is to include it yourself in a small dose and titrate your way up as far as the plant-based medicine would go. But ashwagandha is just super versatile. Part of the reason I think it helps with the testosterone is because of everything that it does in terms of stress. But it's definitely one of those supplements where it's pretty much universally across the board, both in men and women, proven to be very effective. And in men, it just has multiple applications because we've added this pituitary and HPTA, an endocrine component in addition to the adrenal health. But as we've discussed throughout the course of this masterclass, because adrenal health and cortisol are so related to testosterone in terms of what stress does to star protein and in terms of the impact of stress having the pregnenolone steal, ashwagandha obviously has some sort of interplay with those various mechanisms and components in the body. So that's why it's highly recommended, because whether it's a testosterone issue or cortisol issue, it's one of the safer implementations that can be included in a regimen for a male who needs to improve testosterone levels or overall improve their adrenal health. So that's why ashwagandha comes up so often, is it's really multifaceted. Other people even report having sleep benefits from it. So really hits across the board of those various training, nutrition, lifestyle factors that we talked about, because it's helping to reduce stress load while also helping us kind of manage those resources for our body as well, making it a very universally applicable supplement, both for males looking to restore testosterone naturally and for males who are on HRT or TRT as well. Now that we have an understanding of the science behind the HPTA, endocrine system, and the production of testosterone, and how to apply that knowledge, it's important to understand a few key client examples that are going to come up during your coaching journey, or if you yourself are an athlete, something that you might be experiencing that you can relate to. There are several different client avatars that we can walk through. We'll focus on a few primary ones today. One is going to be a male who has a bit more estrogen dominance as a result of higher body fat. The best thing that you can do for this client is begin to bring that body fat down below 20%. You may want to strategically use supplements like DIM and potentially fenugreek or long jack to help reduce that aromatase inhibition. Getting the body fat off is also going to help in that journey, and making sure that there's resistance training involved to help create proper amounts of testosterone and growth hormone. Getting adequate sleep is important for all client avatars, but particularly in terms of fat loss and insulin sensitivity, having a greater amount of sleep will help these clients in their goals to reduce body fat. This is one case where I think it's okay to still try and optimize the hormonal profile, but have a caloric deficit, assuming this client came to you eating at least maintenance calories or greater. If they're overweight but potentially under eating, you may need to switch the approach in order to make sure that they can make continued progress over time. But the supplementation can be key here. Monitoring estradiol or E2 through the labs is going to help you monitor and steer that client towards their ideal testosterone levels. It's not necessarily the case every time that a client with higher body fat has higher estrogen levels, but it is something that you will see during your coaching journey. A second avatar that we can walk through is a client who's leaner that has either been under eating or overactive. Particularly if you had, say, someone who is a CrossFitter or potentially competitive natural bodybuilder. There have been studies done at the University of Wilmington specifically showing the transient changes for competitive athletes in their hormonal profile. So this can occur for several reasons, but one of the primary reasons is because we're diverting hormonal production towards the stress response. So the best thing you can do for these athletes is lower the amount of stress they're experiencing by implementing some adaptogens, increasing sleep. And for these athletes, if they are leaner and incredibly active, increasing the carbohydrate consumption can actually work indirectly to improve testosterone levels by producing insulin and mitigating cortisol around the workout. So with this second avatar client, where we have the very active individual, higher levels of stress, both training stress or maybe it's life stress, we can get a handle on that through supplementation, such as adaptogens, maybe adding in a sleep aid to get more slow wave sleep. And we can also increase their macronutrient profile if we're worried about their hormonal state. So this would not be just healthy fats. This is where testosterone and carbohydrates are related, and oftentimes people may not realize. We can protect testosterone by closely monitoring our cortisol response. Labs that you may want to get for this type of client is a 4-point salivary cortisol, looking at their DHEA sulfate in addition to their total testosterone as well as free testosterone. I would have them list on their weekly or biweekly check-ins how they're sleeping, their performance in the gym, and seeing if you can rectify that over training. If these problems persist or they're having issues in their labs, you may need to reduce the total training volume, bringing them back to 3 or 4 days a week if they are currently training every day. But I believe that you can improve the hormonal profile, keeping their training constant, assuming you're able to manipulate the nutrition and supplement variables and monitor their blood work and biofeedback over time. A third avatar or example might be someone that is not necessarily having large amounts of training stress, but they are having large amounts of life stress, and that's impacting their testosterone levels. This is also going to be that same cortisol production pathway where the raw materials may be getting robbed. So the similarity between this type of client and the client is overactive is that the body doesn't necessarily distinguish or discriminate between types of stress. While they may impact us differently metabolically or change the caloric demands that we have, The similarity is that both of these clients are going to respond very well to increased sleep and more adaptogen usage. So I would recommend something like rhodiola in the morning, taking ashwagandha, either a KSM-66 ashwagandha or sensoril ashwagandha, to help with naturally balancing the circadian rhythm. What both of those clients have in common, whether it is the active individual or the person that is highly stressed from life, is that they need to control that outside or external stress in order to have the optimal hormonal profile. If the issues persist, you could add something in like L-theanine or phosphatidylserine to help manage cortisol as well, particularly in the evening. Some people might even need to use it post-workout if their training stress is very high and they have a hard time getting back into a parasympathetic response after their training. You could use that, particularly if they're training at night, so that you can help restore their circadian rhythm. So for those clients, pay special attention to their total stress load, make sure that time management is covered so that they're performing and feeling their best in their day-to-day life, not just in the gym. You'll take those steps, add the adaptogens in, and increase sleep. Oftentimes, macro adjustments might be needed, but if they have a particular goal, you may need to tweak that nutrition to support that goal. So whether that's a calorie deficit, keep in mind that the calorie deficit would actually contribute to the total volume of stressors in that person's life, similar to how in our athlete example, that athlete training more would actually result in a higher level of stress or cortisol production and kind of backfire in terms of what we're looking at for total testosterone. So those avatars, the similarity is we might see a reduction in free testosterone, total testosterone, an increase in cortisol, or if they've made it through the stages of essentially burning out through their adrenals, we may actually get to the point where cortisol is low and DHEA sulfate is low and the neurotransmitters are low. So think of those three client examples as you are working through in your coaching practice, because you will have clients who come to you at higher levels of body fat that need your assistance in managing their estrogen, particularly males who are obese. The second is going to be clients who are staunch advocates of training. They're always in the gym, they're working very hard, and maybe they either have a calorie deficit or an issue with overtraining. And then the third is going to be helping to manage life stress and testosterone production in that third category. Hopefully these client examples, you can start to think or relate these to some clients you've worked with in the past and begin to apply these concepts moving forward. Some other client examples that we'll dive into today are specifically a client that would be on testosterone replacement therapy that is showing signs of increased aromatization from having not necessarily super physiological, but having the replacement dose in their body. So oftentimes, let's say you had a 40 to 50-year-old male who is given anywhere from 100 milligrams to 200 milligrams of testosterone per week as an exogenous intramuscular injection. Oftentimes what will happen is if this is more testosterone than the body is used to, it will begin to aromatize into estrogen at higher levels than what is typical based on their natural production. So if the doctor is not handling this medically with a pharmaceutical, that would be a case where you could use the same supplement philosophy as an overweight male with a predisposition to aromatization to utilize DIM or long jack or fenugreek or some natural aromatase inhibition and natural products for SHBG to help keep more of that replacement dose of testosterone bioavailable or unbound or not converted to estrogen. So very important to be mindful of, because not everyone achieves the same level of testosterone with a replacement dosage. So you could have John Doe get 100 milligrams or 200 milligrams of that testosterone replacement, and his level may be different than someone exactly the same weight, height, activity level, everything. The way his body assimilates that testosterone could be different. So that's where having some herbal intervention or strategies, if the management of testosterone begins to get a little bit out of hand, make sure that they do, mention this to their physician if there are any types of drug interactions. But many times physicians will not prescribe any type of aromatase inhibition or estrogen management products along with the TRT. So I would encourage your client to potentially go to a naturopath or to seek counsel from either an endocrinologist or their primary care and inquire about their estrogen levels for that specific client avatar group the TRT patient who's having his testosterone either bound or converted to estrogen. Another important client example is going to be the male who has a history of undereating, potentially anorexia or disordered eating. The most important thing to restore proper hormonal function is going to be a proper reverse diet and bringing calories up to maintenance as efficiently or quickly as possible, keeping their health in mind and trying to restore that hormonal balance. We don't want to necessarily shift to a surplus right away. That can cause other complications, but you certainly do need to add calories in and also be mindful that the client's mind state may be averse to adding that food in regards to their hormonal profile. So someone who is chronically under eating or in a calorie deficit is typically going to be resistant to eating more because of the fat gain, but having the additional calories, we'll have to explain to that client that it's vital in order to improve their quality of life and potentially the health risks associated with the anorexia or under eating. What's happening in those cases with an anorexic or someone who's under eating is not only do they lack the raw materials, but their body also perceives life to be a very stressful situation. The stress from the caloric deficit itself can have ramifications in terms of cortisol and circadian rhythm, but also, as we've discussed, pregnenolone being the basis of testosterone as a mother hormone and cholesterol being the basis to pregnenolone, we potentially run into some issues if there's not enough dietary fat being eaten and where overall our body is just super deprived of nutrients being in that chronic calorie deficit or anorexic state. So more so that's going to be addressed with nutrition, but there may be some supplement intervention in terms of adaptogens to reduce the total load of stress on the body, along with combining some elements to help preserve free testosterone once production creeps up. It's not uncommon to see anorexic individuals or people who are under eating to have testosterone levels under 200 or under 250, and the reference range is roughly 300 to 1100. So this is a very significant decline, very low level. It's going to be very important for them to bring that up. Typically, when the levels are that low, the estrogen levels are also very low. So bear that in mind as you're working through the lab work and working with that client. So to recap those two that we just covered, we had the potentially older male who's on TRT, potentially having too much aromatization or testosterone bound to SHBG, using supplementation strategically to address that issue. And then we had a potentially could be younger or older male, but if under eating or anorexic, potentially running into the issue of testosterone levels in the 1 to 200 range, needing not only a reverse diet, but potentially supplement intervention and mitigating stress and cortisol in their life as well. Throughout the course of this masterclass, we've covered several key concepts pertaining to men's health and male androgen deficiency. In our first section, we covered the science of androgen deficiency, or the science of testosterone in general, and understanding endocrinology. While we don't expect you to be an endocrinologist, urologist, or really have any comprehensive understanding, it is important to at least have a baseline understanding so that when your clients come to you, you can know what to look for on intake forms and how this system works. And using the system, you can basically break down from top to bottom what's going on in the body. We need to remember that the HPTA axis is essentially a negative feedback loop. So what does that mean? When a hormone is low, it's signaling back to the top of the chain to produce more of that hormone. So in our case, we're looking at a negative feedback back to the brain for the hypothalamus to produce GnRH to then signal the pituitary to ultimately release luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which are those key triggers and precursors to testosterone. After our science section covering that endocrinology, developing and cultivating that baseline understanding, we talked a little bit about the application of concepts pertaining solely to testosterone, focusing primarily on the management of stress and the hormone cortisol, as well as the aromatization of testosterone and estrogen, and producing testosterone in natural male clients and athletes. We also talked a little bit about the negative effects of performance-enhancing drugs, exogenous testosterone, testosterone derivatives, and selective androgen receptor modulators as they pertain to your male clients and what they can also ultimately do to the endocrine system, essentially impacting that negative feedback loop and sending mixed signals to the pituitary gland, ultimately lowering our testosterone production, total level of androgens in the body. After that testosterone section, we covered a few key concepts pertaining to adaptive physiology. Our body adapts to chronic stress, knowing that when there's chronic stress present in our environment, whether it's from lack of food, harsh climate, or it could be from intense, acute, or chronic physical stress, our body is going to respond in several ways. We talked about adaptive physiology as it pertains to the thyroid gland. We talked about adaptive physiology as it pertains to inflammation. With thyroid, our key takeaway here as it pertains to male testosterone levels is that ultimately stress will inhibit the conversion of T4 to T3. We also know that stress and hypothyroid will ultimately impact testosterone due to the fact that we do have thyroid receptors in our Leydig cells. We also know that it will downregulate luteinizing hormone, that potent precursor coming from the pituitary signaling testosterone production. So hypothyroid is probably one of our biggest concerns, going hand in hand with low testosterone levels. After the thyroid, we talked about the impact of inflammation, external infections, and even the diet and gut permeability on testosterone levels. What's happening here is signaling that inflammation is basically attacking what we're viewing as this foreign invader in our body. So whether that's coming from gut permeability or otherwise, or a foreign infection, that response is then signaling to the hypothalamus that something is wrong. Our body then adapts using our internal physiology to try and address that problem. We're addressing that problem in several ways, oftentimes which results in a cortisol response, then impacting testosterone, impacting thyroid, and many of the other hormones in the body. Cortisol, as we discussed, does have some anti-inflammatory properties. So as a result, when we do have that cortisol to cortisone mix up in our body, essentially, we end up with problems that stem from that as well. After inflammation, we talked about specific client examples pertaining to adaptive physiology, the drains and charges as a great way to break down individual clients as they're coming through into your coaching practice. We talked about how drains are sometimes a sympathetic nervous system input and how charges are oftentimes a parasympathetic input. What's very unique about this system is that things like food or fasting or supplements may actually serve on both sides of the equation ultimately in balancing out your client's health and making sure that we're looking out for their best interests long term. In addition to drains and charges and the adaptive physiology portion of this masterclass, we did also cover a subset on andropause and medications that are going to impact our male clients. Andropause is the process of essentially male testosterone decline over the life cycle or over the lifespan. This will happen at different ages and to all different body types. So when you're looking at your aging male clientele, always consider looking at those biofeedback signals, looking at labs to see if andropause is potentially something to be considered for them. Andropause, as we remember, is the pause or essentially onset of that decline in libido. We talked about the risk of osteoporosis and also deterioration in our musculoskeletal system. So usually we do have some muscle loss, potentially even some bone loss as well. Preserving testosterone levels can also be helpful for managing cardiovascular disease, and that testosterone to estrogen ratio and having healthy estrogen levels in those aging males is going to be important for elements of longevity and cardiovascular health. So it's not just the one-sided mechanism of testosterone and muscle building as many people would make it out to be. We also talked about specific supplements and some frequently asked questions pertaining to male androgens, testosterone, testosterone conversion, and testosterone derivatives. Always be mindful of these, and your best bet for assessing supplements and handling some of those frequently asked questions that you may get from your clients or that things that may come up to you as a coach from other coaches is to always refer back to that client biofeedback, performance, and ultimately what you're going to get on their intake form when they come to you. Always rely on labs when possible. While we do realize that there are obviously a lot going on in our medical system, insurance, and other obstacles that will impact your ability to get labs, you always want to try and support your client by providing them at least with a list that they can go to their doctor or potentially, if need be, go to a third-party resource clinic or a private medical lab that can draw that information for them if it is a serious condition. What we do know is that low testosterone is not a problem that's going away. The trials and tribulations of impacted androgen levels from our current society and stress levels are a problem that you're likely going to face as a coach during your lifetime and during your career. This is something that has become increasingly prevalent in the last decade, as well as in the course of the 21st century. We know that the average male testosterone level is significantly lower than our grandfathers or people that would have even been in our same line of descent. It's important to manage these factors primarily through the assessment of chronic stress or drains on our body, as we discussed. If you can manage stress, implement appropriate nutritional protocols, manage their recovery, and properly periodize their training or outsource to someone who can periodize their training, you're setting up your clients for long-term success as it pertains to their male health and overall testosterone levels. I hope that this ultimately creates an impact for you and your coaching clients, and you're able to improve the health of many men that you work with across the country and across the world. Don't feel overwhelmed by this information. There is a lot there. You will likely have to watch this class several times to really feel that you've grasped it and developed an expertise. Don't limit your learning just to testosterone. Understanding the impacts of the adrenals, the thyroid, the brain, and other cells in the body are really going to help you become an expert if you are looking to focus specifically in men's health. Thank you for watching this masterclass, and good luck.